21. Night Tour. After receiving the invisibility cloak, an inheritance from his father left to him by Dumbledore, first-year Harry Potter felt a constant urge nagging at him. With the cloak, he could roam the castle freely. Filch would not catch him. No professor would see him. He could even slip into the restricted section of the library to learn who Nicholas Flamel was and discover what that infuriating Severus Snape was searching for beyond the trapdoor. Harry had one thought he told no one. He wanted the first use of the cloak to be alone. It was something his father had owned. When night fell, he could no longer resist. Cloaked, he passed through the portrait hole, down the moving staircases and long, sleeping corridors, and slipped into the library. Everything went surprisingly smoothly, until someone was already in the restricted section. A professor stood between the stacks, reading so intently Harry would have startled him if not for the shelves. Harry hid his little lamp under the cloak and inched past. He didn't check what book the professor was reading. The restricted section was too vast. He only needed to sneak a book back to his dormitory and return it tomorrow night. Moving between the shelves, invisible and content, Harry's mind drifted. The cloak filled him with curiosity about his father. What kind of man had he been? How had he come by such an extraordinary cloak? Had he lurked the castle at night too? A swarm of questions ran through his head, and at the same time a faint sound reached him, like a voice calling. He stopped, reached out, and took down a thick volume. The cover said, "The Book of Answers." The faint voice grew stronger, as if promising that opening it would solve every doubt. Ordinarily, Harry would have refused. Ron had warned him that mysterious books were dangerous. But something about the call pulled him in. He flipped open the flyleaf. Ah! A scream roared from the pages. A grotesque face on the cover seemed to push and contort as if trying to crawl out, and the scream poured from its mouth. Harry slammed the book shut and shoved it back into place. The sound stopped. For a second, everything felt unreal. But then he heard footsteps, not one but several, coming closer. Panic shot through him. He tightened the cloak around himself and in his haste knocked his lamp to the floor. He fled the restricted section without looking back, barely slipping past a startled Filch and his cat at the library entrance, and ran into the dark corridors. He didn't stop until his lungs burned. "Professor," a voice said from the shadows, "you told me to report anyone wandering around or sneaking into the restricted section." Harry froze. Filch's voice cracked out, then Snape's, sharp and accusing. "Restricted section? Who is it? Did you see him?" "It's me," a third voice answered. Sagres stepped forward from the darkness, holding a book in his left hand. A faint cry still leaked from its flyleaf. "Sagres," Snape's voice was brittle. "Again? What do you think you're doing?" "Doing what I do daily," Sagres said without expression. "Aren't you two doing the same old routine as always?" He walked up to Filch and shoved the book into the caretaker's arms, which made Filch stumble back, half startled, half disgusted. The Book of Answers, a standard dark arts treatise listing the harm of various curses. Sagres glanced toward the darkness and then, cold and precise, said, "Can't I read it? Or must I report it to you?" "No need, Professor." Filch craned away from the book, as if its pages might bite him. Snape reached for the volume. "He's only doing his duty." "As expected of your ally," Sagres said to Snape with a half-smile. "After all, protecting Slytherin students is part of your job too." He ignored Snape's sour expression, took the book and walked off into the night without another word. He had not meant to stir trouble between Snape and Filch. He'd noticed someone moving in the restricted section, someone illegal, someone who'd used an invisibility cloak of unusual quality. Ordinary cloaks were different. They often flickered or betrayed a hair, but this one was near perfect. If it had been his in his own school days, even a single hair would have been invisible. A faint set of footsteps had betrayed the wearer's position and seemed to lead to an empty classroom not far from where the professors were standing. Sagres intended to check it once they had gone. As their lights faded, Sagres returned to the door and slipped inside. He muttered a disillusionment charm over himself and entered the small classroom. Harry stood before a huge mirror, expression rapt and complicated. Sagres read the inscription at the top of the frame and recognized it. The Mirror of Erised, the Mirror of Desire. Those who gazed into it saw their deepest wish reflected back, and many had become obsessed. Sagres pursed his lips. This had Dumbledore's fingerprints on it, he thought. Why would such an object be left here so casually, the door unlocked? It was too obvious to be accidental. He looked at the student before the mirror, young, cloaked, and shook his head. Dumbledore, Sagres decided, was giving the boy a test. Best to leave him to it. With that, he turned and left, leaving the young wizard alone with whatever longing the mirror would show him. The next day, Professor Greengrass, who had stayed late in the restricted section, suddenly looked up. His expression went oddly distant. After listening for a moment, he sighed and made his way toward the abandoned classroom where he had left the Mirror of Arid the night before. As he expected, Harry was there again, and not alone. He had brought a companion. Greengrass felt a dull exasperation. Did the Gryffindor children never think about consequences? Faced with so blatant a magical object, they hadn't gone to the library to check its function or origin. Instead, they came and stood before it every day. Harry might still be ignorant, new to the wizarding world, but what about that red-haired Weasley? He had actually argued with Harry over who could look into the mirror. "Do you think this mirror can tell the future?" Ron asked, curious. A flash of yearning crossed Harry's face and went as quickly. "Impossible. My family is gone. Ron, I want to look again. You had it all to yourself last night. My turn now. What's the point of that? Are you only thinking about your house cup?" Harry shoved him. "I want to see my parents. He broke off. "They mean everything to me. Don't push me. Maybe I'll see something special too." Greengrass had heard enough. He walked to a suit of armor in the corridor, touched the helmet, and transformed it into Madame Norris. With a conjured hiss, the cat bureaucrat was sent to burst into the room. Chaos erupted. The two boys dropped everything, pulled on their invisibility cloaks, and fled. Greengrass watched them go, more than mildly displeased. If they'd been in Nocturne Alley instead of Hogwarts, he thought, they might already have been disassembled for parts and sold. On the third day, he had a premonition and went back to the classroom. As he'd feared, Harry was there again. He sat hunched before the mirror, he kept staring as if lost. Greengrass crept up behind him unnoticed and watched. In the glass, Harry's family smiled and waved. The sight made him radiant and at the same time broken. Joy and grief tangled until, for the first time in his life, Harry felt a new kind of pain. Not Aunt Petunia's insults, not Dudley's bullying, not even Aunt Marge's mockery. This hurt was sharp and private. Greengrass did not use a disillusionment charm. He stood a little way off, frowning, and finally spoke in a calm voice. "You're here again, Harry." Harry's shoulders froze. For a split second, he considered throwing on his cloak and vanishing, but when he turned and saw Greengrass standing there, he gave up the thought. "Sorry, Professor." He stopped. Nothing sounded like a good excuse. "Like many others," Greengrass said, "you are immersed in the Mirror of Arid." "I didn't know its name," Harry said. "I only saw my family." His voice broke. I felt it was them. That is its cunning. It alters what appears to match your deepest desire, and then it makes you crave it. Greengrass's tone was quietly severe. Your friend saw himself lauded, celebrated. You saw your family. Desire blinds. It makes you careless. You lose focus. You stop being on guard. For that, Gryffindor will lose 40 points. Harry bowed his head, fighting back tears. He tried hard not to cry, because he didn't want Greengrass to think he was weeping over points. He was crying because the mirror had given him something he might never have again, not for real, and that coming and going filled him with grief. The points aren't just for breaking rules. To be frank, I've never been fond of Hogwarts rules for the sake of rules, Greengrass said more softly. There is really only one rule that matters. Don't get caught. Harry looked up, surprised. Greengrass's voice was oddly wry. You were careless because you treated most of us like slow-witted trolls. My deduction, 10 points per person per incident, is already lenient. He looked Harry in the eye. Learn to be smarter. Don't assume an invisibility cloak puts you above everyone else. If you grasp that, then these 40 points won't have been wasted. Thank you, Professor Greengrass, Harry said earnestly. As for the mirror, Greengrass's voice softened. Its proper name is the Mirror of Arid. I'm not surprised you were tempted. Any sensible person would be. It's not that you're weak, It's that the mirror is designed to be irresistible. Why do you say that? Harry asked. Because people are always vulnerable to what they most want, Greengrass replied. Even knowing it's false, they rush toward it. Very few who have stood before this mirror have managed to resist. He waved a hand, and a gentle gust lifted Harry back from the glass and turned him away. It is a marvelous object, but it neither reveals truth nor increases understanding. For many people, it is worse than a useless trinket. He patted Harry's head, an uncharacteristic gesture, and added, I will speak to Dumbledore about moving the mirror. Don't look for it again. Professor, may I ask you something? Harry said. Greengrass inclined his head. Answering questions is a teacher's duty. What do you see in the mirror? Harry asked. I don't look into it, Greengrass said, and allowed himself a rare, faint smile. I don't need a mirror to tell me what I want. I hope you will learn the same. Harry nodded, startled by the honesty. Greengrass watched him gather his cloak. Now go. Slip back to your dormitory, avoid Filch and his cat, and get a proper night's rest. You'll have to be sharper tomorrow, but if you choose to, you can walk away from this. Harry picked up his invisibility cloak and left. Greengrass watched him go, then turned away, the mirror's glass catching the light like a promise he did not trust. 23. Troll Practical Course. Are you going to keep hiding? All expression vanished from Sagres' face when he looked toward the desk by the door and saw Headmaster Dumbledore's figure slowly materialize. The headmaster smiled, untroubled by the fact that someone had been watching him. You've done very well, Sagres, truly. Even I couldn't have done better, Dumbledore said, a little theatrically. Is that so, Professor Dumbledore? Sagres snapped. Then you've done terribly, because even I couldn't have done such a thing. How could you think to use the mirror of Erised to tempt a boy who has been an orphan and never seen his parents since childhood? Sagres frowned, his voice flat. Do you take satisfaction in teasing a child who has been forced to suppress his desires? Or did you want Harry Potter to stare at his murdered parents to harden his hatred of Lord Voldemort? You've misunderstood me, Sagres. Dumbledore moved toward the mirror and spoke softly. I only hoped the boy might have a trial so that when he faces hardship later, he can recognize his true self and not be blinded by illusions. Sagres' tone was cold. So what you're saying is, to prevent Harry Potter from losing himself in the future, you'll let him fall to pieces while he's still at school? Sagres, you know I don't mean it like that. The headmaster smiled, shaking his head as if seeing him for the first time. But I didn't realize you cared so much. You must have a kind heart after all. Isn't it tiring to keep up that cold facade? Not as tiring as your amiable facade, Sagres said with disdain. You had this boy's future planned out in your head, didn't you? Have I ruined your plan? Sagres despised Dumbledore's self-righteous wisdom, the habit of rearranging people's lives because of their weaknesses. It was the settled arrogance of old men, a thing Sagres had already seen at Hogwarts years before. I think you've truly misunderstood me. Dumbledore looked at the mirror without turning. Even if you had not come out to stop him today, I would have come and said the same things. Then what was the point? Sagres asked. There is a point, Sagres. Of course there is. Dumbledore finally turned. I understand people's hearts better than you do. More than power, I trust in things like love and compassion. You don't distrust power because you lack it. You can afford to believe in those things because you already have enough power, Sagres shot back. Inner strength needs something real to stand on. You want a first year who has never truly faced life and death to develop inner strength? Harry has already faced life and death, Dumbledore said, blinking. He did so the day he was born. Isn't that an experience of its own? From the start, I told you, your teaching is excellent. He will learn much from you. Then hear what I said earlier. Hide that mirror somewhere the students can't find it, at least until they're ready. Don't let it appear at Hogwarts again. As you wish, Dumbledore replied with a smile. But before I hide it, don't you want to step forward and look yourself? Do you really want me to look, Professor? Sagres asked calmly. Dumbledore opened his mouth and said nothing. Sagres turned and left the classroom. Hogwarts settled back into its usual quiet. After Sagres taught the Gryffindor and Slytherin students how to deal with trolls, an owl delivered a reply. When he saw the 3 crystal vials attached to the letter, he couldn't help a small, satisfied smirk. The Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff seniors had apparently completed their negotiations with Headmaster Dumbledore, and after consulting with Sagres, the headmaster had agreed to allow lower-year students to audit Sagres' classes, only for charms theory, though. Practical courses, with their risks, were not suitable for students who hadn't yet taken their owls. Sagres, meanwhile, was preparing a practical troll course. He had chosen a large open space near the edge of the Forbidden Forest and placed 3 crystal vials, each containing a different kind of troll, in appropriate environments. An alpine rock troll stood amid rocky terrain, a Rhine mud troll squelched in a broad swamp, and a black forest moss troll lay hidden deep in lush, dense woodland. He surrounded the area with repelling charms to keep any unwelcome creatures or students out. To control the experiment, he set up 3 magical traps. Each vial was rigged so that if someone tried to pick it up, the troll inside would be released and all restraints on it would be lifted. Portkeys would transport teams into and out of the area. Teams would be sent to random zones. Exit portkeys at each site would be plainly marked but would only activate once the troll was defeated, driven off, or had lost interest. Sagres also cast safety magic on the students. If a troll's force struck them too hard, they would be teleported to a designated safe location. After personally testing every device and confirming that the traps triggered correctly, he took the final details to Professor McGonagall. This would be, effectively, a midterm exam. Sagres believed a practical course like this would best show how students solve real problems. For these young wizards who had grown up in peaceful times, confronting a troll would be a severe and instructive challenge. Perhaps few of them would ever choose dangerous professions, but if they did, Sagres preferred their first experience with a troll to be under the school's controlled conditions. They might learn and never use it, he told McGonagall, but it's far better than discovering they don't know when it matters. With that argument, he persuaded her. However, McGonagall and the other professors insisted on observing. Though he thought their attendance unnecessary, he had to agree. Let them watch, he thought. Perhaps seeing it will loosen their overwrought protectiveness. Wednesday came around faster than anyone had expected. It was the first practical lesson of the week, and 2-year groups from all 4 houses had been brought together. The line of students at the edge of the Forbidden Forest was long. Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, and Professor Sprout stood with Sagres. Even Snape had come, a rare appearance that, in Sagres' opinion, was probably motivated by curiosity about the chaos that might follow. With house prefects watching and deans nearby, the students behaved, tense, excited, but orderly. I know you will have questions, Sagres began, but I cannot reveal the specific content of this practical. I have taught you for nearly 5 months, and now I want to see results. This lesson will count as a test. It is mainly an assessment of your ability to think and react under pressure. All spells you may need have been taught in class. Rest assured, I have cast protective enchantments on every one of you. No one will suffer real harm. After calming the buzz of whispers, he continued, Before we begin, you may form groups. 3 teams will enter the test area at a time. Your objective is to find a crystal bottle etched with runes and remove it from the area. To ensure fairness, I will not cast mechanical mind on you this time. Remain calm and rational. He left them half an hour to gather into teams. More than 20 groups formed, one with over 30 students, several medium-sized teams, and a few with only 2 members. Begin, Sagres announced. 3 teams vanished at once. The 30-strong Slytherin team materialized in a rugged, boulder-strewn mountain zone. A 5-person Gryffindor team found themselves among dense woodland. A 2-person Ravenclaw pair were transported to a murky swamp. The Slytherins split to search. Accio, crystal bottle, a student cried. Nothing happened. Another tried Revelio and then shouted triumph. Found it! It's embedded in the stone. Half of the bottle stuck out of a boulder. Relatio was tried several times to no avail. A 6th year stepped forward, whispered a few incantations, and a faint light shivered from his wand. The stone around the bottle began to loosen. He turned to the others. We'll need to work together to get it out. Confringo, a girl cast, and the rock cracked into fragments. Stop! You'll break the bottle. It won't break that easily. Use your heads, someone snapped. The Slytherins raised their wands, and as one chanted, Confringo, the boulder exploded into rubble. The runes on the bottle flashed, and something huge burst free. Through the crystal, they could see it materialize not far away, a mountain troll, its bulk smashing the ground and sending rocks flying. The students stumbled back as the troll roared and smashed its fist down. "Stay calm," shouted Walter, the Slytherin prefect. "Use impediment jinxes. Don't let it close." A tangle of spelllight met the troll. "Attack the head," someone remembered Professor Greengrass's advice. "No, that head shell is too hard," another cried. The troll's skull was encased in a thick, rock-like hide and shrugged off many hits. When Flen suggested, use the conjunctivitis curse, the troll responded by swiping him from a boulder. He turned to white light and vanished midair. Panic spread. A few students tried to slip away using disillusionment charms toward the exit portkey, but the portkey wouldn't work. Rocks were flung into the crowd. Each strike changed a student into that same white light, and they disappeared. "Defindo," a student fired. A white line sliced a ramming horn from the troll's head, only to enrage it. The troll seized even larger stones and hurled them into the densest pockets of students. "Ric Decempra!" Somebody cried in desperation. The misfired tickling jinx hit a teammate instead, and she collapsed laughing until the troll prodded her with the broken horn, and she turned into white light. One boy transfigured a pile of huge white rabbits from a rock to distract it. Small, colorful animals burst from smoky transfiguration spells, and the troll's cloudy yellow eyes fixed on them. It smashed a boulder down so hard that the shockwave turned 2 more Slytherins into white light. More students vanished as they tried to flee. In barely 10 minutes, the 30-person team had been decimated. Most of the rest had turned to disillusionment charms and crept away. Only about 10 remained, and those staggered to the exit and at last activated the portkey to escape. The 5-person Gryffindor team in the woods took a different tack. Confronted with a forest troll, they lit the undergrowth with incendio, hurling flames into the canopy so that tall firs became towering torches. The troll retreated, panic evident in its movements. The glowing, moss-covered back of the creature caught fire, and it was driven off. The Ravenclaw pair fared worst. As soon as their bottle touched the swamp water, a 3-meter mud troll rose up from the corrosive pool. Melinda reacted first. She cast Glacius. The spell struck, but at that instant, the troll hit her. Her wand flashed white, and she vanished. The other student, frozen with shock, managed to cast Glacius as well. The troll became encased in ice, but so did the crystal bottle. With the bottle frozen and her companion gone, she had no choice but to abandon the attempt. Snape stood at the edge like a black statue, sneer sharpening as each error played out. "Seems Ravenclaw's wisdom isn't all it's cracked up to be," he said, voice cold. "It wasn't a disaster," McGonagall said, taut-lipped, clutching a crumpled Transfiguration textbook. She relaxed only when she saw the Gryffindor's controlled use of fire. There was a hint of a smile. "But is this really acceptable?" "They're being tested, Minerva," Flitwick said. "They must learn to act and think under pressure. Hogwarts isn't always safe." Sagres waved his hand. The forest, mountain, and swamp returned to their original states, and the freed trolls were contained and placed back into small bottles. New groups entered the test area. Every team stumbled in different ways, but many students surprised the teachers with cleverness and adaptability. Jofrin, a 6th-year Ravenclaw, used a trenching 3 feet charm to dig a pit and trap an otherwise mindless mountain troll. Coopers, a 7th-year Hufflepuff, levitated a stone over a swamp troll's head, then amplified his voice with Sonorous to crash the stone down and stun it. Peen, a 7th-year Slytherin, used a swamp curse to bind a forest troll. Grace, a 6th-year Gryffindor, collapsed the ground under a troll and finished it with a boulder impact. Others used disillusionment charms to slip past dangers, multi-shot jinxes to stun forest creatures, Glecio to send a mountain troll careering, drying charms to weaken river trolls, and imaginative transfigurations to change the terrain itself. "These children have more dueling potential than I imagined," Flitwick laughed and clapped. "But making them proficient with these spells will take more work than they've done so far." Professor Sprout nodded in agreement. Sagres' methods seemed to be working. When the last group returned, carrying their rune-covered crystal bottle, a cheer rose up from the edge of the forbidden forest. 25. It's in the newspaper again. Well done. Professor Sagres scanned the crowd. More than 70 of you passed the test. To be honest, this pass rate exceeded my expectations. Professor, is there a reward for those who passed? A student called. A reward? Sagres hadn't considered it. He felt there wasn't much to reward for a routine test, but since someone had asked, he gave a ready answer. The runic crystal vial is the reward. Everyone who passed will receive one. He held up a small crystal vial. It's been charmed with an undetectable extension charm and an unplottable charm. It can hold magic flames or alchemical liquids, and of course it can store food and keep it fresh indefinitely. They were simple alchemical items, basic runic applications with only a few rare ancient runes, but even so, their ability to contain alchemical liquids and magical flame outclassed most similar objects on the black market. If sold, each would fetch no less than 6 galleons. The next morning, while the young wizards were still eating breakfast in the great hall, a flock of male owls shattered the calm. The front page headline of the Daily Prophet glowed red under the candlelight. Hogwarts sees dark arts combat training? Over 200 students' lives hang by a thread. The photograph beside it showed a Slytherin girl apparently being struck by a troll, though she was presently sitting at their table, calmly eating. "What is this?" Ron asked, confused, holding the paper open. "Didn't Fred and George say Professor Greengrass's practical class went perfectly?" Harry snatched the paper, skimming the headline and then reading the article in full. What rubbish! No one was injured in class at all. He slapped the prophet down, angered. Didn't Professor McGonagall say that all the students were protected by magic? They even photoshopped fangs onto the troll, Hermione said, picking up the paper and setting her pumpkin juice down heavily. She glanced at the anonymous interview tacked on at the bottom. Some heir of an old family claims certain professors are turning the school into a fighting arena in Nocturne Alley. Another pure-blood conspiracy. Hermione rolled her eyes. That's slander. Why are they always attacking Professor Greengrass? I heard Greengrass sent members of several families to Azkaban before he became an Auror, Ron said. He sounded like he was sharing gossip he'd been told, or been told by his family. Some of them were even killed outright. Of course, those were dangerous dark wizards, and a few were connected to certain family lines. You mean it wasn't just that one time? He did more of that? Harry asked. Yep, Ron nodded. You might not know this, but Greengrass became a registered dark wizard hunter for the International Confederation of Wizards right after he left Durmstrang. Quite a few people ended up on his list. Dark wizard hunter? How have I never heard of that? Hermione looked genuinely puzzled. It's because the organization was disbanded last year, for some special reasons. It never had many members to begin with, and the Confederation forbade reporting on it, Ron said casually. How do you know that? Hermione asked suspiciously. My dad was involved in that line of work, Ron replied, a little offended. What, you don't believe me? Hermione lifted an eyebrow and said nothing more. Harry was still irritated by the newspaper's story, but felt powerless to counter it. At first, Professor McGonagall had reservations about Greengrass's methods, Hermione said, but after this incident, she seems to appreciate them more. So what? What does that mean? Ron shrugged. It means Greengrass's methods are justified and effective. Hermione sounded certain. Aside from Snape, the other 3 heads of house have all confirmed Greengrass's teaching results. Isn't that proof enough? It's odd the Daily Prophet would run that without checking the facts, Harry said. That's not odd at all, Hermione replied. The Prophet does this all the time. They don't care about the truth. Hermione's right, Ron added. That's why our family hardly ever reads the Daily Prophet. Oh, by the way, there's a new school rule, Hermione said suddenly. Lower year students can audit Professor Greengrass's charm theory class. I've already signed up. Want to come with me? We already have enough classes, Ron groaned. We don't even have time to rest. Harry wanted to go too, but between Quidditch practice and everything else, his schedule was tight. He was about to decline when Hermione jabbed him with a look. Humph, then you'll never see my notes or my homework. Ron's face went white. He waved his hands. No, Hermione. I meant we already have enough classes, so I wasn't saying we shouldn't go. Exactly. Ron's right. And anyway, it's Professor Greengrass's class. We absolutely have to go, Hermione said, triumphant. That's more like it, she snorted. Not everyone can sit in. I got the three of us spots from Professor McGonagall. 26. The man behind the scenes. In a cellar hung with the Flint family crest, Carbot Flint tapped a stack of parchments with his wand. We need more, authentic medical records, he said, his pale fingertips brushing the image of Sagres lecturing in the crystal ball. Have Mrs. Knott tell everyone her daughter's arm was grazed by a troll during class and diagnosed with permanent magic damage. A tall figure slid from the shadows. Will that be enough to get him expelled from Hogwarts? It's just an excuse. Carbot's voice curled with contempt, though the other man barely registered it. The Board of Governors can use it to pressure Dumbledore. Tomorrow, I'll have the Daily Prophet publish editorials demanding the dismissal of a dangerous individual. Then, members of the pureblood families will temporarily withdraw their children from Hogwarts. He paused and flicked a glance at the other man. Cornelius Fudge has already written to Dumbledore. As long as we keep pushing, getting him out of Hogwarts won't be difficult. And once he's gone, without Dumbledore's protection, I hope it's as you say. The figure stepped fully into the light, leaning forward as he spoke coldly to Carbot. If it's not, you will pay. Worry about yourselves. Carbot ignored the threat. Although he's a bastard, he's not easy to deal with. You needn't worry about that. A gray-haired woman emerged from the darker recesses and gently shoved the tall man aside. She smiled as she addressed Carbot, but her eyes flashed ice. She stroked the collar of his coat. He took a subtle step back. So when are you planning to leave here? She asked. Carbot's expression hardened. I don't think we'll be leaving until he does. You mean you plan to stay in my manor indefinitely? The woman said, incredulous. Where else would we go? She answered her own question with a calm smile. Carbot's face went grim, and he swallowed his anger before turning away. Once he's expelled from Hogwarts, you must leave, immediately. The man and woman retreated into shadow without another word. Outside the cellar, Carbot stopped pretending to be composed. He ran a cleaning charm over his collar, then sent a house elf to fetch him a new coat. A bunch of filthy creatures, he muttered as he set ink to quill and drafted a letter to the editor-in-chief of the Daily Prophet. In the headmaster's office, Sagres held the newspaper with a steady hand. Professor Dumbledore offered him a letter sealed with the ministry's emblem and gave a thin, rueful smile. It seems we've run into fresh trouble. Sagres did not take the letter. He only studied the paper long enough to note the name of the editor-in-chief, Barnabas Guffey. The Board of Governors is demanding the suspension of all outdoor practical lessons. Dumbledore's tone was carefully neutral. When did you start taking errands from Cornelius? Sagres interrupted coolly. Sagres, do not be so hard on an old man, Dumbledore began. Sagres lifted the paper between them. You can't blame me just because a dog bit me. I'm not blaming you, Dumbledore said, smiling faintly. Then why am I here? Sagres dropped the newspaper onto the desk. Never mind, I'll handle it myself. No, Sagres. Dumbledore sat up, his face suddenly grave. As headmaster, this is my responsibility. You must let me manage this. I am calmer than anyone, Sagres said quietly as he rose and looked down at Dumbledore. You might not know it, but I cast calming spells on myself every day. All the same, I would rather you leave this matter to me, Dumbledore said, meeting his eyes. Please. Sagres tapped the ministry letter and the paper. Professor Dumbledore, you may have your ways, but I have spent years pursuing the true meaning of magic, not playing political games. He let his finger make a small, deliberate circle on the desk. These people don't understand that. They need to be taught a lesson. Without waiting for Dumbledore to reply, he turned and walked to the spiral staircase. His face betrayed nothing, though inside he was anything but calm. When he had been in Azkaban, they had promised him a measure of freedom. So long as his teaching kept the students safe, the committees would leave him alone. Already the interference had begun, and Dumbledore had merely tossed the problem to him. If Dumbledore intended to solve it, why had he called him here? To test his temper? To seek his opinion? Sagres's patience had been exhausted by officials who occupied lofty titles and did nothing but meddle. He resolved to give them a lesson so severe that they would recoil at the very mention of his name. He whispered the editor's name under his breath, Barnabas Guffey. In the next instant, he was gone. Moonlight broke into silver on the Thames as Sagres arrived on the marble steps of the Daily Prophet headquarters. A surge of raw magic radiated from him. The mahogany door of Barnabas Guffey's office blackened and carbonized the moment Sagres laid his gaze on it. When his fingertip traced the gilded motto, "Truth above all," on the panel, a thin, mocking smile touched his lips. "Good evening, Mr. Guffey," Sagres said casually, taking a seat across from the editor-in-chief, who sat buried beneath a drift of manuscripts. Barnabas looked up, dazed. He blinked through his spectacles at the newcomer, then noticed the room beginning to blacken around them. Papers on his desk smoked and burst into flame, yet everyone else in the building continued as if nothing were wrong, walking past the windows, rushing to and fro, utterly oblivious. Barnabas felt a ridiculous urge for a muggle expression. This isn't scientific. It wasn't a spell he recognized, not a charm he'd been taught. Nothing in the manuals accounted for this. "I suppose I can skip self-introductions," Sagres said. "After all, you personally compiled those reports about me." He leaned forward. "I hear you have opinions about my teaching methods." Cold sweat prickled at the base of his skull. Barnabas shot up from his chair and found that the protective wards he'd meticulously layered around his office meant nothing. He tried to run for the corridor, but stumbled back. He shouted for help, and his voice was swallowed by the noise of the building. He attempted diplomacy, babbling apologies and entreaties. Finally, he fumbled for his wand and willed a defensive spell, but his hand shook so badly that he couldn't form a coherent incantation. Outside the glass, colleagues crossed the newsroom, oblivious to the burning papers and their editor's plight. The whole scene felt like a nightmare. Barnabas Guffey's screams bounced off the walls and vanished into the buzz of the office as if nothing at all were happening. Sagres watched him calmly, and only when Barnabas finally stopped struggling did he speak, slow and measured. "As a wizard, you only thought to pick up your wand and face me at the end." Sagres shook his head. "To be honest, I'm very disappointed." You can't do this," Barnabas Guffey stammered. "If you harm me, the ministry will drag you back to Azkaban. Not even Dumbledore could save you then." "Harm you?" Sagres said, feigning surprise. "Of course I won't harm you. I'm just not satisfied with your assessment of me and my teaching methods." He reached into the flames on his desk and pulled out a smoldering, half-charred copy of the Daily Prophet. With a lazy shake, the embers snuffed out and the paper smoothed itself, whole again. He tapped a headline with one finger. For example, this line. He read aloud, "Shocking teaching methods, dangerous individual could lead to Hogwarts closure." He smiled. "I really don't like that title. How about we change it?" The letters on the page unstitched themselves and rearranged into new words. "The Daily Prophet editor mysteriously dies, reportedly suffered horrible torture before death." Barnabas went pale. Cold sweat rolled down his temples, and he was speechless. Sagres arched an eyebrow. "It seems Mr. Guffey isn't very pleased." "All right, then let's find a headline that will satisfy everyone." He placed the paper on the desk. The letters shifted again and formed, "Hogwarts Pioneers Practical Charm Courses, Controllable Risks, Significant Results." Barnabas snapped his neck toward him and nodded fervently. Sagres allowed a faint smile. "Very good. It seems Mr. Guffey is satisfied." He leaned back, watching the man force a relieved smile. Then the smile vanished from Sagres's face. "Now tell me one thing," he said coldly. Barnabas's grin froze. Sagres's expression was unreadable. He reached out with legitimacy, gentle, surgical, and shattered the man's feeble acclumency. Memory spilled like water. "Carbot flint," Barnabas answered instantly. To be thorough, Sagres ran 3 variant memory charms on him in quick sequence. Memory recall to extract the meeting's details, memory weave to tuck a false memory into the seam, and obliviate all to erase every trace of the evening. When he finished, Barnabas remembered nothing of what had just happened. Sagres apparated away from the Daily Prophet office. The instant he apparated into the Flint family manor, a presence in the cellar snapped awake. Gargoyle Scarfella's stone-gray form opened its eyes. He lifted his head, sniffed, and his orange-yellow pupils narrowed like a predator sizing up its prey. Hunters of the Blood Moon Alliance, his cruel voice rumbled in the dark, and other pairs of cold, glowing eyes lit up around him. The quarry has delivered himself. The Flint Manor crouched deep within a dead beechwood, a 3-story Baroque house the color of ash. A faded silver-green crest hung above the wrought iron gate. Sagres had been here before, 2 years earlier, hunting a ministry fugitive named Leonard Flint. He did not bother to knock. He raised his wand and fired a blasting charm. The heavy gate exploded inward, the magic protecting it shredded by the raw force of the frenzy blast. An elderly house elf poked his head through the wrecked ironwork. Seeing Sagres, the elf leapt out and snarled, contorting his face. "What have you done, you filthy half-blood?" he spat. "How dare you ruin the Flint family's ancient architecture? Don't you fear Lord Flint's wrath?" He snapped his fingers, and 2 squads of alchemy golems in steel armor marched through the breach, weapons clanking. Sagres ignored them. He flicked his wand, and a severing charm shot for the elf's throat. A circular shield charm flared up to block the spell. "Corsian, step aside." A voice cut through. Carbot Flint himself, regal and venomous, standing in the dark hallway. He waved his wand, and more steel golems responded to his command. "Isn't this the dangerous man the prophet keeps slandering? What, have you come with your filthy mudblood bloodline to grovel before an ancient house?" "Forgiveness belongs to Merlin," Sagres said, idly toying with his wand. "I can send you to him." Carbot's smile snapped. Sparks danced along his wand tip. He forced his voice steady. 2 years ago, you killed my brother and shattered the Flint family's standing at the ministry. You mean the madman who wanted to use his wife's brain matter to repair the family tree because she gave birth to a squib? Sagres said, indifferent. Your tapestry was already riddled with squib branches. Sagres, Carbot roared. The Flint name crushed powerful enemies for generations. You don't even deserve to be the cemetery's gatekeeper. Sagres ignored the insult. He brushed aside thorn vines that had sprung up from the earth and walked forward, wand in hand. Brave for a filthy half-blood, Carbot sneered. Do you think you'll leave Flint territory alive? Sagres chuckled softly. With just you? The sound of his voice was a cue. A cone of thornlight lunged at Carbot. Protego! Carbot threw up a shield, but the impact slammed him through it and sent him crashing into the wall. He landed with a groan. A long, piercing howl split the air. A werewolf came charging from the depths of the courtyard. Sagres watched it approach and smiled faintly. So that's where your courage came from. Your wolf cubs. He stepped forward, the tip of his Everbloom wand settling on the slumped man. Ever heard the proverb, don't bring a wolf into your house? Carbot spat curses and through broken teeth attempted a spell. Necromancy. Under the withered central tree, corpses, squibs executed and buried by former Flint heads, tore themselves from the earth. Sagres waved his wand with a dismissive flick. Iron torrent. The steel golems nearest him melted into rivers of molten metal and flew like living lava, engulfing the risen dead. You should be grateful, Sagres said as he advanced. If I hadn't killed Leonard, you might never have been head of the Flints. Shut up, Carbot managed, waving his wand desperately. A green bolt drove for Sagres, who flicked his wand. A stone wall rose up and stopped both the werewolves surging forward and Carbot's curse. Sagres walked through the wall as it dissolved, closing the distance until he stood over Carbot. He read the headline off the man's broken face as if narrating a prophecy. The Flint family suffers werewolf attack. Head Carbot Flint unfortunately dies. He paused, watching the panic bloom in Carbot's eyes. Do you like that one? The iron golems and alchemical constructs behind Carbot had been reduced to molten slag. The undead were burned to ash. Corsian, the house elf, still had one desperate trick. He threw up a shield charm, but Sagres' crimson severing bolt dissolved on contact. Confusion turned to horror. The elf's shield unfolded into a lattice of red blades that folded back on itself and stabbed him from within. Corsian was cleaved into pieces. The last light in Carbot's eyes guttered. He slumped, his gaze fixed on Sagres. Sagres looked back, unemotional. In about 3 seconds, you'll beg me to end you, he said. I will never submit to you. Carbot rasped. Flesh stripping, Carbot screamed. The spell peeled at his skin, flayed and exposed. Then Sagres snapped his wand back and let the scream die out. He assessed the ruined man. I overestimated you, he said coldly. You couldn't even beg. He dismissed the stone barrier, and a pack of werewolves surged over the iron bridge toward him. With a quick levitation charm, he tossed the half-dead Carbot toward them as bait. The lead werewolf leapt and tore Carbot in half. Sagres watched it happen without surprise. He raised his wand and whispered, Hominum Revelio. A ripple of magic swept the pack. Where the beasts had been, hunched humans collapsed to the ground. They scrambled to regain composure and reverted into wolves with frantic howls. One, Scarface, with corrosive saliva dripping from his fangs, hurtled at Sagres and smacked into an unseen barrier 3 feet away. A mirror impact. The wolf spun and was thrown backwards. Sagres named them flatly as he fought. Gargoyle Scarfella, he said, nodding at the tall figure that had charged him. Former interrogator for the Ministry's Dangerous Creatures Division, who ran experimental dark arts on prisoners and escaped, now tactical commander of the Blood Moon Alliance. He shook his head. Looks like a brainless idiot. Tactical commander. What a joke. Gargoyle howled and charged again. Sagres sent him reeling with a sandstorm, and then an earthbind erected spikes where he landed. Gargoyle impaled himself on the jagged stone and did not rise. Corrosive pus spat from another wolf. Sagres flicked a repelling charm. The searing fluid flipped direction and struck the gray-furred wolf that had lunged at him. The creature shrieked and collapsed trying to revert. Sagres' voice was flat as he continued cataloging names and sins. Scab Serafina, St. Mungo's healer turned biopathologist. She mixed werewolf venom with potions to manufacture new plagues and joined the Blood Moon Alliance for live test subjects. He raised an eyelid. You grew a parasitic plant that lodged on the vocal cords and screamed victims to death. Before she could answer, Sagres ended her pain with a quiet crimson tear. He flicked his wand, and the iron bridge writhed. The steel slithered like a giant python and flung itself into the fight. A werewolf launched from the second floor was lashed away by the snake's tail. Grumador Bullock, Sagres said as the man tried to come forward. A squib-born alchemist's assistant who murdered his benefactor to follow Fenrir and fight perceived discrimination. A bone-shattering charm reduced him to dust. A pair of conjoined twins, Tick and Topak, sliced through a curtain, but Sagres' chaotic reassembly ripped the torn velvet into a barbed net that trapped them in midair. A buzzing blast from his wand ruptured both of them from within. Blood poured from their mouths, their organs shredded. Blood and pus pooled beneath his feet. Blue flames guttered where it pooled. Sagres frowned and murmured, Frostfire reversal. Ice and fire both swept through the pack at once. Legs froze into sculptures of glassy frost, flesh scorched and rotted. Panic tore the remaining 5 werewolves. They fled. Sagres tapped the steel giant python. It liquefied into molten iron and poured after them. 2 of the fleeing wolves tried to apparate away. Sagres was faster. Displacement reversal. Their apparitions were torn apart mid-transit. They reappeared in scattered pieces on the ground. He walked across a carpet of fur and debris to where Gargoyle had impaled himself, now barely breathing. He leveled his wand at the creature's brow. Give my regards to Fenrir. A ripple of magic passed through, and Gargoyle's body went still. Sagres turned his attention to the manor. The ancient Baroque house had gone from damaged to devastated under the torrent of molten steel he commanded. To purge the enchanted portraits and any lingering magic inside, he stepped back and invoked a second, older war spell. Meteor Summon. The sky changed. A massive, burning meteor tore through the clouds, the wind pressure stinging his face as it fell. It was a remnant war magic from the Age of Giants, like Iron Torrent, an instrument of efficient slaughter and area denial, now forbidden by the International Confederation of Wizards. He watched the meteor smash into the estate. The manor crumpled under its impact. Sagres muttered to himself as ash and smoke rose around him, quieter than before. There aren't many left in the Flint family. I hope you learned your lesson. Chapter 28, Possibly Being Fired? It wasn't yet dark when Sagres apparated back to Hogsmeade. Uncharacteristically, he paused at the pub for a time before making his slow way toward Hogwarts. On the path, he brushed past a heavily cloaked figure, and despite the disguise, knew who it was, Quirrell. The sharp, unmistakable smell of garlic gave him away. No mask could hide that flaw. Sagres ignored him. This was Dumbledore's concern. Or rather, the task Dumbledore had assigned Snape, and it had nothing to do with him. Tomorrow was a house Quidditch match, and Professor McGonagall had already, as she always did, invited him to watch. He didn't much care for it, but he didn't refuse either. News from the Daily Prophet swept the castle the next morning. The Flint estate, one of the sacred 28 pure-blood families, had been attacked by werewolves the previous night. The story set the students whispering at once. Slytherins murmured especially, since their Quidditch captain Marcus was a Flint. Rumors about Sagres' teaching methods were mostly ignored. He was quietly pleased. There was nothing he liked better than being left alone to teach. He watched the match on the Quidditch pitch at a leisurely pace. No accidents occurred, not only because Dumbledore stood on the sidelines, but because Harry Potter was on form. He caught the golden snitch less than 5 minutes into the game, ending it almost as soon as it began. Sagres was in a good mood. The quick finish had saved him time. He spoke to Harry briefly after the game. "I'm glad you didn't get lost in that mirror," he said, patting the boy on the shoulder. "You were excellent today. I hope in any future matches you keep winning as fast as this one." "Thank you, Professor Greengrass." Harry grinned, flushed with victory. Before they could say more, Dumbledore called Sagres away. The good mood drained from him at once. When he reached the headmaster's office, Dumbledore was not alone. Professor McGonagall stood there as well. The two of them, head and deputy, had called him in together. Without much thought, Sagres conjured a chair and sat. "Sagres," Dumbledore said, looking at him over the top of his spectacles, "I called you here to ask you something." He glanced at McGonagall, then spoke in a tone so solemn it made the office feel colder. "This concerns whether you may continue to serve as a professor at Hogwarts." McGonagall's eyes widened. She covered her mouth in surprise. Sagres, however, merely narrowed his eyes and waited. After a beat, Dumbledore continued with a sharper edge. "You must tell me if what happened to the Flint family has anything to do with you." McGonagall's shock deepened. "What are you saying? Albus, how could this involve Sagres? It was the werewolves." "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Minerva." Dumbledore fixed Sagres with a steady look. "This may be murder, Sagres. We need to know the truth." Sagres leaned back, the chair creaking faintly. He absently stroked the wand hidden in his robes, a wand carved from the wood of an everlasting flower, as he spoke. "Before we begin," he said, voice flat, "are you interrogating me?" "Don't take it like that," McGonagall soothed. "We simply need answers. I believe you, Sagres." The headmaster inclined his head, and Sagres met it with a cool, almost defiant calm. "Very well. I admit it. This matter is directly related to me." McGonagall's hands flew to her mouth. Dumbledore's face tightened. Sagres ignored their surprise and pressed on. "But there are things I don't understand, Albus," he said. "When the prophet slandered me, why didn't you stand up and tell the truth? If you respect the law, why are you using it to suppress me when I seek my own justice? Am I so weak that I must be pushed around, or do you have a prejudice against me?" He met the headmaster's gaze without flinching. "To be frank, I've killed at least 80, perhaps 100 people. My conscience is clear. Every one of them had a damned reason to die." Dumbledore's expression did not change outwardly, but his voice was slow and absolute. "Even so, that is no reason to take a life into your own hands. I will not allow a murderer to teach my students." Silence fell, like a heavy cloak. At last, Sagres spoke again. "Yesterday I went to the prophet. Barnabas Guffey told me Carbot Flint had blackmailed him into publishing lies about me, so I went to the Flint Manor." McGonagall could barely find her voice. "And, did you kill him?" Sagres answered with a chill shrug. "I think you'll be disappointed. That inbred imbecile full of family honor and bloodline supremacy does not deserve to be killed by my hand." "Then who did? Why don't you look into it yourself, headmaster?" Sagres was blunt to the point of rudeness. McGonagall reached for a gentle defense. "Don't be like that, Sagres. I know you would not act without cause." He cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Do you know what curse Carbot used on me? The killing curse. And in his flower garden, they buried at least 30 executed squibs." Both Dumbledore and McGonagall were struck silent by the accusation. Sagres went on, voice cold. "To get to me, he didn't hesitate to collude with the werewolves of the Blood Moon Alliance. They desecrated innocent bodies with necromancy. Tell me, Should such a man live? Dumbledore's tone softened, but his words were firm. No matter how dreadful the man, the law must decide. We can't be judge and executioner. If the law worked, Sagres scoffed, they would have been punished when they first executed a squib. Then the werewolves killed him? McGonagall asked, quieter now. He nodded. Gargo, the tactical commander of the Blood Moon Alliance, killed him. But they were allies, McGonagall protested. Why would they turn? They were allies before they transformed, not after, Sagres said. Dumbledore's face clouded and something like apology crossed it. Sagres, then, I owe you an apology. I misjudged you. Sagres stood without ceremony, expression unreadable. Apology won't fix what was done, he said, and I cannot forgive you. If I'm ever truly wrong, don't expect me to surrender. He turned and left the office. The portraits along the walls murmured among themselves. McGonagall and Dumbledore exchanged a long, troubled look. I don't think he's wrong, McGonagall said at last, voice earnest. You're being too harsh on him, Albus. You'll only drive him the wrong way. Dumbledore rubbed his temple, as if the weight of it pressed on him. Perhaps, but he's changing so fast. If someone like him loses control, the consequences would be more terrible than 10 Lord Voldemorts. McGonagall covered her mouth at the image. You know who wouldn't target a pure blood for a few squibs, she murmured, and the portraits, unable to remain silent, added their own nervous whispers as the two senior teachers sank into thought. It was early March, and with auditing now permitted, Professor Sagres's classes had become increasingly popular at Hogwarts. As he walked into the room with his textbook, a cluster of students immediately swarmed his messenger, Loctus, asking every sort of question. The raven on the lectern, irritated by the noise, simply flew up to the ceiling and refused to come down. The students, having realized Loctus posed no threat, had grown bolder. Too shy to bother Sagres directly, they pestered his bird instead. A good number of people had come today. There were even some first years in the classroom. Sagres didn't recognize many of them, but he noticed Harry and his two friends sitting in the front row, watching the blackboard with rapt attention. Harry and Ron both considered auditing Professor Sagres's lessons one of their wisest decisions, even if Hermione had been the one to drag them there in the first place. They were learning a lot. Even where the spells were beyond their current level, the explanations already helped with their everyday schoolwork. Harry had also bought 3 runic crystal vials from the Weasley twins, 6th-year students, paying a full 17 galleons for the lot. It had stung the pocket at first, but after using them, he felt it had been money well spent. The vials Sagres made were unusually practical. Harry would secretly fill his with food during meals in the Great Hall and bring snacks back to share in the common room. Midnight treats suddenly seemed worth every galleon. He'd given 1 vial each to Ron and Hermione. Ron filled his with butterbeer, against the rules, while Hermione used hers to carry library books. Sagres set his textbook down and started teaching without preamble. Today we'll be studying the distribution of magic nodes for Lumos. He placed the book on the desk, snapped his fingers, and the classroom went dark. Put away any foolish fantasies. Lumos is not a soft, romantic ambient light. It's the first line of defense against darkness. A few soft laughs came from the dark. Then Sagres's Lumos flared and illuminated the room. The core of the spell is control, not creation. The orb at the tip of his wand split into a swarm of tiny lights that settled like fireflies on the student's shoulders. Cedric from Hufflepuff lifted a hand. But Professor, the book says, the textbook was written 200 years ago. The firefly on Cedric's shoulder shattered into a spray of motes that drifted to his desk and spelled, in glowing letters, "Auditors are not allowed to ask questions." Cedric scratched his head awkwardly while his deskmates covered their mouths to stifle laughter. I'll reiterate, my class rarely generates questions, and there is almost never extra credit. Sagres glanced over the obedient students, and because the auditors come from different years, your progress will vary. Many younger students hadn't learned half the spells discussed. His course covered everything up to the owls, so much of it was brand new to them. But that's your problem to resolve. He waved his wand without looking back. Lumos is a very simple spell, but its uses are wide, dispelling darkness, blinding an attacker, signaling teammates. He changed the tone. And if you can make the lumos resonate with the environment and alter its shape. He flicked his wand, and the fireflies folded into the forms of miniature ravens. Then congratulations, you've learned decoy tactics. The tiny lights shifted again until each perched on a shoulder in the student's likeness. Sagres surveyed the astonished faces and nodded with quiet satisfaction. Any simple charm could be expanded into many possibilities. Sagres had only understood that truth late in life. Fortunately, not too late. Waving his wand once more, the glowing figure stood up and produced even tinier wands to cast miniature lumos of their own. That level of fine control was no simple feat. Sagres suspected few in the wizarding world could match it. He moved on to show how to use light to transmit messages and how to split light to repel dark creatures. Even as the lesson drew to a close, the students remained absorbed by the shifting, dazzling illumination. When class ended, Hermione used the runic vial Harry had given her to tuck the tiny luminous copy from her shoulder inside, smiling as she sealed it away. Sagres swept his wand to dispel the darkness. The light trails from his motion dissolved the floating clusters. Remember, he said, the most dangerous darkness isn't the shadow outside. You can see and fight that. It's the hesitation in the moment you need to cast a spell. The student straightened. He waved again, and glowing notes filled everyone's textbooks. These were advanced uses of lumos, briefly annotated. Time is limited, so I won't go into every detail. Those who want to learn more can study this further. He closed his book, but before leaving he added, "Oh, and these notes will only last until tomorrow morning's breakfast." Several pupils immediately picked up quills and began copying while the ink still showed. Sagres left the classroom and headed straight to the Hogwarts library. He had no lessons for the next 2 days and planned to enjoy the rare leisure. With the school year ending in 3 months, many courses had moved into review and homework loads were growing. He often found the younger students buried in their studies in the library, an outcome he approved of. His class might not set homework, but the other professors certainly did. Seeing the students quietly researching in the library was far preferable to wondering what mischief they might be up to around the castle. 30. The Sorcerer's Stone and the Dragon. Hagrid, are you hiding out in the library for some reason? A puzzled voice made Sagres prick up his ears. Ron Weasley, one of Harry's good friends. Just browsin'. Hagrid's broad figure looked furtive as he tucked a few books into his coat. You lot still haven't figured out who Nicholas Flamel is, have ye? Ha! We knew who he was ages ago, Ron said triumphantly, and we know what that dog's guarding on the 3rd floor. It's the Philosopher's Stone. Shush! Shush! Hagrid nearly clapped a hand over Ron's mouth. Don't be so loud. He glanced around, clearly anxious to see if anyone had overheard. From where he crouched in the stacks, Sagres smiled faintly and tapped an ear with his wand to listen more closely. Actually, we wanted to ask you something, Hagrid. Harry's voice came next. Besides Fluffy, is anyone else guarding the stone? Shush! Hagrid hissed again, impatience plain in his tone. Listen, don't say another word. Not here. Students aren't meant to know about this, or Dumbledore'll think I told you everything. It makes no difference, Ron protested blankly. You practically told us already. Hagrid buried his face in his hands, defeated. He squeezed his huge bulk out from between the shelves and, muttering, left the library. He looked like he was hiding books in his coat, Hermione said, frowning. Do you think it has anything to do with the Philosopher's Stone? I'll go see what he pulled from that shelf, Ron said, setting aside his homework and heading to the spot Hagrid had been standing. A few minutes later, he came back with a large pile of books and a conspiratorial grin. Dragons, he announced, widening his eyes. Hagrid was looking at dragon books. He spread them out. Dragon species of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, dragon breeding for pleasure and profit, from egg to dragon. Hagrid said he wanted a dragon when we first met him, Harry remembered. He told me then. That'd break the statute of secrecy, Ron said. There's that Warlock's Convention from 1709. Dragons are classified as an XXXXX class creature. Private breeding without authorization is illegal and punished by the Ministry. They're dangerous, Hermione added. Don't forget Charlie. He was bitten by a wild dragon in Romania. There aren't any wild dragons in Britain, Harry objected. Who said that? Ron corrected him. "There are Welsh greens, Hebridean blacks. The ministry's got a whole department for this, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, with a Dragon Research and Restraint Bureau that keeps tabs on wild dragons." "So what's Hagrid up to?" Hermione wondered. "Let's go to his hut later. I'm almost finished with this essay." Ron trailed off and bent his head back over his parchment. Sagres listened to the rustle of homework and finally put his wand away. The conversation was full of useful details. They spoke of Nicholas Flamel and the Philosopher's Stone. Sagres did not need to look Flamel up. The alchemist was famous across the magical world as the only known maker of the stone, an artifact that could transmute base metals into gold and, it was said, grant a vastly extended life. That last claim Sagres treated with some skepticism, but Flamel's reputed 600-year lifespan was hard to ignore. If the students were talking about the stone being at Hogwarts, then perhaps Voldemort had sent Professor Quirrell back to the school to find it, either to heal himself or to seek immortality. The questions came easily to Sagres, even though he was not particularly invested in the outcome. If anything catastrophic happened, Dumbledore would sort it, and if events played out as rumor and destiny suggested, Harry Potter would be the one to face Voldemort. Sagres was quietly confident of that. Even if Harry failed, Sagres admitted to himself he was curious to see what this former Dark Lord could do. People said Voldemort's command of the dark arts was unmatched. Sagres did not disagree or feel threatened. He had dedicated himself to the darker branches of magic too, and he believed his work rivaled the best. A common warning in the magical community held that repeated use of the dark arts would erode the practitioner's mind and draw them into darkness. Sagres did not scoff at the warning, but he did not fear it. His mechanical mind, an unnatural steadiness of feelings and thought, gave him absolute control over his emotions. He monitored his soul as precisely as he monitored a clockwork mechanism. He could dial his feelings up or down and knew exactly where he stood. That control also let him access very high spell power deliberately. Strong emotions often amplified magic. Sagres could choose when to unleash such amplifications and when to keep a cool head. He usually suppressed emotion in combat because he had not yet met an opponent who required him to abandon reason. As for Hagrid wanting to raise a dragon, how dangerous could that be? Sagres knew spells that would let someone breed a dragon in secret. He dismissed Hagrid as unreliable, though. The three students' concern was understandable. A few uneventful days slipped by. One afternoon, as Sagres returned from the Hogwarts library, a snowy owl settled on his windowsill, clutched a letter in its beak, and stared at him politely. He took the parchment and frowned as he read. "Dear Mr. Raven, I write to you from the Ronnie Black Market in Belgium and hope you might render me a favor. The scoundrels in those underground auctions boast that astrologers calculate the positions of the planets even to pour a cup of tea, so I must draw on your particular knowledge of the ecology of the Forbidden Forest. Last month, at a black market auction, I acquired a special guest for 3 ounces of cursed mithril. This centaur warrior, he calls himself Leon, had his right forehoof corroded by a dark wizard's chaining curse and was later captured by a poaching party. I rescued him and struck a bargain. If I return him to the Frostdew clan in the northeast of the Forbidden Forest, he will read a horoscope for me and give me magical materials worth 3,000 galleons that are unique to that forest. As you know, the Forbidden Forest is no longer the comfortable refuge of the International Statute of Magical Creature Migration. The ministries monitoring copper eagles have grown more sensitive, and more worrying still. The Frostdew clan keep the memory of a 17th century wizard siege carved in their caves. They bear a deep grudge against wizards. For reasons of my own, I cannot travel to Britain. If you can help, I will arrange to transfer Leon to the edge of Hogsmeade at midnight on Friday. In return, I offer 2 items I think will interest you. 1. I hear you have long been curious about time turners. I recently acquired a decrepit time turner in Egypt. It can be yours. 2. The complete copy of De Vermis Mysterious you've been seeking lies in the deepest vault of the Balk family. If you desire it, I can seize it and trade it to you. Sincerely, Snowy Owl on the night of the waning moonbeam. Sagres folded the letter, thinking a moment, then unrolled fresh parchment and began a reply. He had not meant to involve himself. This was an illegal trade in sentient beings, and he did not like getting mixed up in such things. But the rewards were tempting. A time-turner and the coveted Divermis Mysteries. The harder problem would be actually obtaining the materials Leon promised. Centaurs were proud and hostile toward human wizards. Getting them to hand over unique magical goods willingly would not be easy. Sagres amended the meeting place in his letter reply to the edge of the Forbidden Forest, rather than Hogsmeade, safer, with fewer watchful eyes and ears. Then he entrusted the reply to the snowy owl and watched it fly back into the winter sky. 31. Fire Dragon Storm, Part 1. In the common room, the trio sat quietly, talking about Hagrid. The worst had come true. Hagrid did have a dragon. Worse still, the hatchling had been seen by Malfoy when it broke out of its shell. For days, Malfoy had been staring at them with that smug, poisonous look, and the three of them were on edge. Fortunately, they'd persuaded Hagrid to let Charlie, Ron's eldest brother, take the dragon. All they had to do was get the hatchling into a wooden crate that night and send it to the top of the astronomy tower, where Charlie's colleagues would fly it to Romania on their brooms. "Don't worry so much, Hermione," Harry said, uncharacteristically soothing. "Once tonight's done and Norbert's gone, whatever Malfoy says won't matter. Who'd believe him?" "Exactly," Ron agreed, slapping the arm of his chair. "Every time I see Malfoy's smug face lately, I just want to." He stopped, frowning. "He even borrowed a book from me today. I could tell he was trying to wind us up." "You lent it to him?" Harry asked. "Of course I did," Ron answered. "Had to keep him calm, didn't I? What if he'd gone and complained to the ministry?" Hermione snapped her book shut. "Tonight's midnight, right? The letter said 12. "You've asked that already," Ron said helplessly. "Yes, it's 12. If you don't believe me, I can show you the letter." He opened his book and froze under their stares. "Oh no." He lifted his head, voice thin. "I just remembered. I put the letter in the book." Hermione's eyes went wide. "Don't tell me Malfoy borrowed that book." "I wish I could," Ron said bitterly, "but he did." Harry and Hermione sighed together. There was no time to send another owl. The plan had to go ahead. "Too late to change anything," Harry said. "We don't have time. This is the only way to get rid of Norbert. We do it tonight." "But if Malfoy reads it," Hermione began, bleak. "Don't forget the invisibility cloak," Harry reminded them. "Malfoy doesn't know we have it." "He's not going to think we can vanish," Ron said quickly, "no matter how clever he is." That night they crept to Hagrid's with the invisibility cloak. Fang lay where Hagrid always kept him, faithfully guarding the door, his tail still bandaged. Hagrid had tears in his eyes as he put the dragon into the crate, almost choking as he spoke to it. "I've packed you some mice and a bit of brandy," he muttered, voice thick. "Eat if you get hungry on the way." He turned and, eyes shining, went on. "I put in its toy bear too, so it won't be lonely. I'll come and visit, I will, you hear?" There was a ripping noise from inside the crate. Hermione peered in and guessed the toy bear had already been put to use. "Goodbye, Norbert," Hagrid sobbed. The three of them felt a pang too, but it was late and there was no time to waste. Harry stepped forward and covered the crate with the invisibility cloak. They pulled the cloak over themselves as well. Hermione produced her wand and cast a levitation charm on the crate. Harry and Ron hovered at her shoulders, ready to lift if the charm faltered. Every step toward the astronomy tower felt like an ordeal. Peeves nearly foiled them on the staircase. He was there, humming and oiling the banister with a bucket and brush, but they edged past, holding their breaths. "Almost there," Harry whispered, straining to reach the corridor below the tower. A commotion ahead made them freeze. For a moment they nearly dropped the crate. They melted back into the shadows beneath the cloak and watched from 10 paces away. Two figures were struggling in the dim light, one tall, one short, a flickering lamp between them. It was Professor McGonagall in a tartan nightgown and hairnet, gripping Malfoy firmly by the ear. "Detention," she snapped. 20 points from Slytherin. Wandering about the castle at night, what on earth do you think you're doing?" "No, Professor. Let me explain," Malfoy blurted. "He's got a dragon. Harry and his friends." "You can't even make up a decent excuse," McGonagall said icily, hauling Malfoy towards Snape. "Come along, then. See how he likes a bit of detention." The three under the cloak gave each other a silent, jubilant look. Ron whooped softly. Even Hermione couldn't hide a grin. They carried the crate on, heartbeat quickening, until four young wizards swooped down from the darkness on broomsticks. Charlie's friends had arrived. They chatted cheerfully as they fastened the crate to their brooms with straps, talking of life after Hogwarts and their work with dragons. Their voices were loud. Harry bit back a warning. When the crate was secured, the trio shook hands with each of them in turn. The broomsticks rose, and the four young men flew off into the night with Norbert. For the first time in days, a huge weight lifted. They had sent the dragon away. Slytherin had lost points, and Malfoy was on his way to detention. They felt light enough to dance. "I'm so glad," Hermione breathed, actually dancing a few steps in the moonlight, her earlier gloom washed away. "I want to celebrate." "Don't," Harry and Ron said together. "Not yet." "All right," Hermione said, shrugging, but she couldn't stop smiling. The image of McGonagall dragging Malfoy by the ear was too funny. They forgot themselves, and in their relief, Hermione pushed the cloak back a little. Ron laughed aloud, and for a moment, they were no longer careful. A pale face appeared around the top of the stairwell, Filch looking savagely triumphant. "Look what I've found," he croaked. They'd been so pleased with themselves that they'd left the cloak slack. Filch's eyes swept over them, and his smile widened. "As much as I'd like to leave you to your little victory," he said, drawing the words out deliciously, "I'm afraid you're in trouble." 32. Fire Dragon Storm, Part 2. Filch shepherded the three of them toward Professor McGonagall's sitting room on the second floor, only to run straight into Sagres, who had just left the Hogwarts library. "Professor," Filch blurted, bowing awkwardly. "Good evening, Filch," Sagres said, glancing at him and then at the trio. He understood at once what had happened. "Good evening, Professor. I caught a few students out after hours and was about to take them to Professor McGonagall." Filch began, his voice trailing off as he searched Sagres' face for a hint of leniency. Sagres nodded, but did not step aside. Filch's smile faltered. "Professor, you can take care of these students. I'll pretend I never saw them," he said hesitantly, clearly hoping for a special favor for Harry and his friends. "You misunderstand, Filch." Sagres stopped him, quashing the small hope that had lit in the three students. "Taking them to Professor McGonagall is the right thing to do." He ignored Filch's stunned expression, stepped in front of the trio, and after a brief silence said to Harry, "It seems you did not take my warning to heart." He meant the remark he'd made in front of the Mirror of Erised. Harry lowered his head in shame. "I'm sorry, Professor." "You need not apologize to me," Sagres replied, shaking his head. His tone held no pity as he looked at them. "I only hope you had a very good reason for breaking school rules, and that it wasn't done for some trivial prank." He glanced pointedly at the guilty, bright eyes among them. "And I hope you were forced into this situation because there truly was no other way, not because of foolishness, arrogance, or complacency." The three of them grew even more ashamed. Sagres stepped aside, nodded to Filch, who bowed gratefully and resumed leading them to McGonagall's study. The corridor felt unbearably long. They stood outside McGonagall's door in silence. Excuses, half-truths, and lies swirled in their heads, none of them useful. This time, there was no clever way out. Regret sat heavy in their chests. What Sagres had said was right. They had been careless, absurdly complacent to leave the invisibility cloak on the astronomy tower roof. Worse, McGonagall had already reprimanded Malfoy for their sake earlier, effectively vouching for them. If she was angry, she would be furious. "Mr. Filch says you were on top of the astronomy tower in the early hours," McGonagall began coldly as they entered. "Frankly, I'm reluctant to believe that, so will someone tell me the truth?" For the first time, Hermione found herself unable to answer a professor directly. All three hung their heads, eyes fixed on Professor McGonagall's slippers. Their mouths opened and closed, but nothing came out. "No one will speak, then?" McGonagall's voice tightened. "It needs no great intelligence to see what happened. You made up a story about a dragon to get Draco Malfoy out of bed, intending to prank him and make him look a fool, and you succeeded. Do you find this amusing?" They remained silent. "I simply cannot believe it," she said, every word stern. "Pranks on classmates, breaking school rules, wandering the castle at night. I have never heard worse behavior." You, Miss Granger, I thought you were sensible. You, Mr. Potter, I expected you to think of the house. And you, Mr. Weasley, your brothers have never stooped to this. They take pride in following the rules. Ron inwardly rolled his eyes. If only she had caught George and Fred, but he said nothing. All three of you will serve detention, McGonagall went on, and Gryffindor will lose 50 points. 50? Harry gasped, picturing their lead evaporating. Hermione's eyes went wide. How many points would she have to earn back? Ron's disbelief showed even more. Malfoy had only lost 20 points recently, he thought. 50 each, McGonagall snapped, her long, pointed nose twitching with anger. She looked more furious than any dragon. Professor McGonagall, please, Hermione began desperately. Professor, you can't, Harry pleaded. Don't tell me what should be done and what should not. McGonagall roared, cutting them off. They fell instantly silent. Now, go back to your dormitories, at once, she ordered. They shuffled back to Gryffindor Tower like stunned ghosts, completely dejected. Losing 150 points between them kept them awake all night. None of them had dreaded morning more. The news spread through Gryffindor quickly and was hard to believe. Harry's notoriety grew, but this time it brought scorn everywhere he went. Hermione and Ron were often referred to as Harry and his two sidekicks, which didn't help. The jeers stung. Hey, Ronnie, George said with a sly grin as he and Fred approached. Heard you lot lost 150 points for Gryffindor? You're always losing points since you started school, aren't you? Ron shot back. True, Fred agreed, but we've never lost 150 at once. Not even half that? George added. Maybe combined? A passerby suggested. Not even combined. The twins finished, arms slung around each other as they strolled off, chuckling. We were so stupid, Hermione said miserably. Professor Greengrass could have let us off, but he didn't. Don't expect a professor to cover for you, Ron replied, though he knew Sagres, or Greengrass, was different from many teachers. Actually, he is different, Harry murmured. Do you remember what he said to me last night? That I didn't take his words to heart. Did he tell you anything? When we stayed over for Christmas, Harry explained, he knew whenever we were out after hours, and about that mirror. Was that when you lost 40 points? Ron asked, surprised. Yes, he said he disliked the rules at Hogwarts too. He only docked points to teach me a lesson, that we were too careless. Harry's voice was small. He warned me then that there was only one real rule at Hogwarts, never get caught breaking the rules. But we were caught, Hermione cut in. And Professor Greengrass, he is different. I can't quite explain how. Do you think he knew everything we did last night from beginning to end? Ron asked suddenly, a real fear in his voice. I think so, Hermione said firmly. Remember what he said, we were caught because of our own foolishness, arrogance, and complacency. So we can't blame anyone else, Harry said, and the three nodded, accepting it. The bell rang, and the class emptied. Sagres was halfway through packing his books when the taunts started. He looked up and saw Harry and his two friends cutting through a cluster of Slytherins, textbooks clutched to their chests. The Slytherins were clapping and whistling. Someone even mocked. Thanks, Potter, truly our benefactor. Yesterday we were wondering how we'd catch up to your score, and today our prayers were answered. Malfoy pulled it off, didn't he? Another sneered. Not everyone could do something like that. It's all thanks to Mr. Potter, someone else added, the words dripping with sarcasm. They shoved Harry and his friends aside and drifted out in groups. Students from the other houses watched them with the same coldness. Nobody wanted Slytherin to lose the House Cup, but this year Gryffindor had seemed poised to beat them, until Malfoy's last-minute play turned everything on its head. Now, wherever the trio went, they met scornful looks. Even at Quidditch practice, Harry's name had been reduced to that seeker. Harry spotted Wood in the crowd and, shoulders hunched, called to him pleadingly, asking to be let off the team. Sagres had expected something like this, though he didn't want Harry to quit. He had no love for Quidditch, but Professor McGonagall kept inviting him to watch, and Harry's skill was undeniable. If Harry could finish a match quickly, wouldn't that save everyone time? With that in mind, Sagres stepped forward into the whispering throng and cut through the circle of sneers to stand between the three friends and the rest of the students. Ravenclaws, he said, cool and flat, fixing the nearest cluster with an unblinking stare. I'm curious, what has this got to do with you? Silence fell. He didn't soften. Putting your hopes on someone and then resenting them when they don't meet those hopes. If you had even a trace of Ravenclaw's wisdom, you wouldn't be so foolish. He looked pointedly at them. A few heads dipped under his gaze. And you, he went on, indicating another group, the Sorting Hat tells us Hufflepuffs are loyal and upright, yet I have seen none of it here. Do you only call someone a friend when they never err? Is making a mistake a reason to strip someone of your friendship? His voice was cutting. Admiring someone when they're useful and scorning them when they're not. Your opportunism is no less Slytherin than the Slytherins. Even the Gryffindors shifted uncomfortably. When Harry had won Quidditch points, they had hailed him as a hero. Now that points had been docked, they distanced themselves with righteous airs. Sagres allowed the silence to stretch then, with an expression that gave nothing away. He said, "Now, all of you, leave. At once." The students dispersed like startled quail. Once the room was mostly empty, the trio moved to follow, but found themselves frozen as if someone had glued their feet to the floor. In less than a minute, the classroom held only the four of them, Sagres and the three students. Then the three could move again. "Harry," Sagres said, turning to him, "you want to quit the Quidditch team?" Harry opened his mouth and couldn't manage the words. Sagres watched him with a flat, patient cruelty. "I regret I see no Gryffindor in you. I see only a coward who turns his back when things get difficult." His voice was cold and absolute, and it struck Harry like a blade. Quitting won't restore the lost points. It will only ensure you never get the chance to earn them back. Harry dropped his eyes. "Miss Granger," Sagres said next, "I hear you've been afraid to answer questions in class these past few days." Hermione's shoulders slumped. She looked chastened and ashamed. Sagres's gaze flicked to Ron. "Mr. Weasley, shall I continue?" Ron shook his head but had regained most of his composure. Sagres's voice softened a fraction. "This is a lesson and a test. I know the last few days have been difficult for you, but perhaps this will turn out to be for the best." He picked up his textbook, gestured for them to follow, and led them out. They passed the herbology classroom, crossed the Quidditch pitch, and finally stopped outside Hagrid's hut. The three exchanged puzzled glances. Sagres said nothing, simply knocked. The door creaked open. "Professor? Harry? Is something wrong?" Hagrid's big face filled the doorway, worry creasing it. "Yes. May we come in, Hagrid?" Sagres asked. "Of course. Please come in." They crowded into the warm, cluttered hut. Sagres sat down without ceremony. Harry and his friends stood awkwardly. "Hagrid," Sagres said plainly, "do you know that, because of that dragon you were raising being set loose, or otherwise sent away, Gryffindor lost 150 points?" The words dropped into the room like a stone. The three young wizards stared. Hagrid's mouth fell open. None of them could find a word to say. Sagres didn't wait for them to speak. "Hagrid, you've been expelled from Hogwarts once. Apparently you learned little from that. Are you tired of the work of a gamekeeper?" Hagrid began babbling apologies, stumbling over his words. "Professor, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." "You don't need to apologize to me," Sagres interrupted, nodding at the three students standing nearby. "You should apologize to them. They took on the problem for you, and because of that, they're being ostracized by their peers. You cared more for that dragon than for the consequences your actions brought on them." He shook his head. "Frankly, it's disappointing. They stepped forward to help you, and when trouble came, you didn't even offer them a word of comfort." Hagrid stood like a battered wall of wood and fur, his shame plain. Harry, Ron, and Hermione began to speak up for him, but a single look from Sagres stilled them. "Don't let your friends be dragged through the mud because of you again," Sagres warned Hagrid. "Think of the consequences before you act next time." With that, he rose and led the three students out of the hut. Hagrid hurried after them, and outside, he caught up and very sincerely apologized to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. They accepted his apology readily, their innocence and generosity quickly showing themselves. Only then did Sagres allow the slightest hint of satisfaction to cross his face as he watched smiles return to their faces. Chapter 34, Forbidden Forest. After they said goodbye to Hagrid, everyone walked slowly back toward the castle. The young wizards were quiet and lost in thought until Hermione spoke first. "Professor, You won't report us and Hagrid to the Ministry of Magic, will you? Sagres answered without turning his head. Of course not. I have no evidence, and I didn't catch you in the act. They couldn't help smiling. Thank you, Professor. Don't thank me, he said. I've already told you I won't do anything. I only hope you learn something from this. Making mistakes isn't the worst thing. Failing to learn from them is. Loneliness isn't terrible either. It can be the whetstone that sharpens you. They considered that. He ruffled their hair and added, Besides, this time you had each other. If one day you're forced to face something alone, I hope this lesson helps. When Harry and his friends returned to the common room after their farewell with Sagres, they found notes from Professor McGonagall. Detention started at 11 that night. They were to go to the entrance hall and meet Mr. Filch. Each of them had the same note. They glanced at one another and, unusually, didn't complain. They felt they deserved it. As Professor Greengrass had said, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students had no right to glare at them, while Gryffindor students had every reason to be angry. All they could do now was accept the punishment and later try to earn back the lost points. Near midnight, Sagres left the Hogwarts library and made his way alone to the edge of the Forbidden Forest to wait for the contact Snowy Owl had arranged. A little while earlier, Filch had taken Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Malfoy to Hagrid's hut for detention. They were to patrol the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid. Malfoy protested repeatedly, even bringing up his father on the school board, but it didn't change the punishment. He muttered nervously, We can't go into that pitch-black forest. I've heard there are all sorts of things there, maybe even werewolves. Hagrid's eyebrows shot up. What were you thinking earlier then? You should have thought about this before you caused trouble. It's too late to worry now. I'm not going in. If you want to stay at Hogwarts, you go, Hagrid said without pity. Not even your father can change that. If you'd rather be expelled, go to your dormitory and pack. Malfoy froze as if frozen by a spell, glaring at Hagrid. He pressed his lips together, but said nothing. The trio enjoyed seeing him frustrated and weren't worried about the detention itself. Hagrid's been doing this job for decades without any problems, Hermione whispered to Harry and Ron. There's no reason we should meet any danger just because we're here. Hagrid's next words put that notion to rest. Listen up, everyone. Tonight's job is dangerous. I don't want anyone getting hurt. He led them to the forest edge, holding his lamp high. The light swung like a searchlight, revealing a winding path that vanished into the trees. Look there, Hagrid's voice carried in the night. See that silvery light on the ground? That's unicorn blood. A unicorn in the Forbidden Forest was attacked and badly injured. That's the second time this week. Last Wednesday, I found a dead unicorn. We need to find the poor creature and help it. The trio hesitated, unsure whether Hagrid was trying to frighten Malfoy or speaking the truth. What if we meet the thing that did this first? Malfoy asked, voice shaking. As long as you're with me or Fang, the forest creatures won't harm you, Hagrid said confidently. We'll follow the blood trail. Don't fall behind and don't stray from the path. They moved slowly into the forest. It was nearly silent and black around them. At a fork in the path, Hagrid considered splitting them up, but decided for safety to keep the group together. Are there werewolves in the forest? Harry asked. I sometimes hear howling. Could a werewolf have killed a unicorn? Ron added. Impossible, Hagrid said. Catching a unicorn isn't easy. They're powerful, magical, and fast. I've never heard of a unicorn being injured before. Never. They passed an ancient moss-covered tree stump that looked like a green throne. Nearby, the soft sound of running water threaded through the trees. Suddenly, something approached. Hagrid halted the four students and shepherded them behind a towering oak. He set a bolt in his crossbow and raised it, ready to fire. Something slid over the fallen leaves, like a cloak dragging. There was a faint sound of hooves. Hagrid squinted into the darkness. The noise faded after a few seconds. I think I know, he muttered. Something that doesn't belong here has crept in. Could it be a werewolf? Ron whispered. No, Hagrid snapped. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not a werewolf. They kept moving, slower now, listening for the slightest sound. After half an hour, their path led deeper into tangled trees where walking became difficult. The silver blood on the ground thickened, forming almost a continuous line. Through gnarled branches, a patch of white caught the dim lamplight. Harry froze and pointed. Look! A snow-white shape lay among the rotting leaves, a dead unicorn, curled on the leaf bed with limbs like broken twigs, its mane faintly luminous. Its emerald eyes retained the clarity of life, but reflected no life at all, as if the forest silence had been trapped inside them. Hagrid's eyes widened. He took a step forward to examine it when a bush at the clearing's edge shook violently. A hooded figure slid into view from the shadows, moving on hands and knees like some beast closing in. The students stood rooted, stunned and frightened. Hagrid brought his crossbow up and aimed at the figure with deliberate caution. He released the bolt. It screamed from the string toward the cloaked shape. The figure looked up at the sound, and for the first time everyone saw the person's face under the hood, streaked with silvery unicorn blood, bent over as if drinking it. The cloak suddenly rose to its feet. The bolt moving toward it slowed midair, as though struck by some force, then transformed into a writhing, venomous snake and fell to the ground with a thud. "That's a wizard!" The thought flashed through everyone's minds, and not just any wizard. They hadn't seen him move or heard a single spell. This was the sort of silent, wandless casting they had only ever seen a few times before. The cloaked figure glided toward them like a shadow through water. Hagrid fumbled to string his enormous crossbow, but it jammed. "Get out of here!" he bellowed, turning to the three students. The dark figure left them frozen in place. They couldn't move. "Run!" Hagrid roared again, and his shout finally shook a few of them out of their stupor. Fang tucked his tail and bolted. Malfoy spun and fled. Harry felt a searing pain tear through his scar, as if a red-hot poker had stabbed his forehead. He swayed, barely able to stand. "Harry!" Hermione cried, grabbing him. "We have to go, or we'll only get Hagrid in trouble," she said, her voice steady and sharp despite the fear. Ron, pale but stubborn, shook his head. "No, I'm not leaving Hagrid." Before any of them could move, Hagrid hurled himself at the dark shape, two long bolts in his hands. "Flying sand and stones," he roared. Hagrid's shout was met by a hoarse, inhuman incantation from the cloaked figure. A spell slammed into Hagrid and hurled him backward. He hit the ground hard, stunned, but managed to scramble up. Finding the children still there, he snapped. "Why are you still here? Go back to Hogwarts. Find Dumbledore, any professor." Harry's hurt. He's been hit by something," Hermione gasped, panic in her voice. Hagrid's face registered surprise, but there was no time. He slammed the crossbow against the stone and, with a furious snarl, grabbed the three students by their robes, one in each hand, the third tucked under his arm, and turned to run. Then another figure appeared behind them, a woman in a silver-gray cloak, her wand raised. A stream of pure white light flashed from the wand tip. "Holy light expulsion!" she cried. Hagrid and the students reflexively covered their eyes, expecting blinding pain. For a breath, there was nothing. Then they realized they were unharmed, blinking in confusion. Hagrid patted himself as if checking for wounds. A calm, cool voice came from beneath the woman's hood. "Ice blast!" A concussive wave of ice condensed in the air and swept past their cheeks, striking the monstrous cloaked figure behind them like a cannonball. The beast exploded into a thunderous boom that shook the trees and nearly knocked Hagrid off his feet. When the dust and frost settled, the thing that had killed the unicorn was gone. Harry's pain eased as the pressure on his scar vanished. The four of them stared as the woman's hood was blown back by the blast. Long silver-white hair fell free. They all made the same sound at once. She was a woman, and startlingly beautiful. A centaur stepped out from the underbrush behind her and used a hoof to turn over the frost-coated earth. "Is he dead?" the woman asked coolly. "No, he got away," the centaur replied. Hagrid blinked and then cried out, "Lyra?" "Hello, Hagrid. Long time no see," Lyra said. The woman, still composed, cloak dusted with frost, answered Hagrid. "I'm sorry, Hagrid. I can only explain part of it. While patrolling the north, I was ambushed and taken by dark wizards. They moved me around and ended up selling me at an underground auction in Belgium. I was rescued from there, and this lady was entrusted to bring me home." The hunter's eyes swung to the silver-cloaked woman. "She has nothing to do with capturing me," Lyra added with a small smile. "She brought me back." The woman's expression remained impassive as she looked at the unicorn's body. "I did not come for reward," she said flatly. I only brought him back to Britain. Hagrid fell silent, rubbing his arms. The students looked between the two of them, uncertain. Finally, the woman seemed to notice them, curiosity flickering in her gaze. "You are all Hogwarts students?" she asked. "Yes," the boy stammered. "We're first years," Hermione added, cheeks flushed. "Thank you for saving us. At first we thought you were with that thing." The woman inclined her head, then surprised them by asking, "Do you know Sagres?" Hermione frowned. "You mean Professor Greengrass?" "Yes, of course. His lessons are very interesting." The woman gave the barest hint of a smile. Harry and Ron were almost hypnotized by it. Hermione pressed a hand to her forehead, still reeling. Before anyone could say more, a darkness deeper than the evening rolled in from the trees, moving like a living thing. The air tightened, the woods groaned. From somewhere nearby, Malfoy came scrambling back, breathless and terrified, stumbling to join them. The shadow came too fast, its presence vast and suffocating. The trees shuddered under it. A cold dread settled over everyone. It felt like a warning urging surrender. They clustered together, waiting for whatever would fall upon them. Only the silver-cloaked woman stood still, lifting her face to the encroaching dark. For a long moment, a heartbeat or several, the darkness pressed in, then, as suddenly as it had come, the wind died, the trees stood still, and the shadow collapsed as if swallowed. A voice cut through the hush, sharp and authoritative. "Who can tell me? What happened here?" When the words came, a figure in flowing black robes stepped from the trees. Professor Sagres. Chapter 17. The Mystical Horseman. 2 hours earlier, Sagres had waited at the edge of the forbidden forest for a long time and seen no one. Just when he began to worry, the other party had run into trouble. A surge of magic pulsed from deep within the trees. He rose from the stone, frowned toward the forest, then melted into a shadow and sped toward the source of the disturbance. A few minutes later, he arrived at an open clearing and saw everyone gathered there. "Who can tell me what happened here?" he demanded as he touched down, eyes narrowed on the dead unicorn not far away. "Good evening, Sagres," came voices around him. "Professor? Professor Greengrass? Oh, thank goodness." Finally, Sagres frowned, trying to glean useful information from the clamoring replies, and then raised his voice. "Quiet." He cast a silencing charm, and the clearing fell still. He pointed at Nightingale. "Valus, you tell me." Only then did everyone realize they knew one another. Nightingale smiled. "All right, Sagres. I'd accepted a commission to investigate something strange in the forest. I was supposed to meet you at the edge, but while I was waiting I spotted something odd. Perhaps a dark wizard, I'm not certain. I followed at a distance and ended up rescuing your students from him." She nodded toward Hagrid. "And this fellow here helped, of course." Sagres inclined his head, then turned to the 4 young wizards, Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Malfoy, thinking, these children are really a nuisance. Not only do they sneak out of the castle at night, they even dare the forbidden forest. He'd already decided to take many points and assign long detentions, no, months of detention, but first he needed a clear account. "You 4, he said, pointing, "who will tell me why you are here?" His face was severe. "If your explanation isn't satisfactory, consider your free time gone to detention." The 4 began to speak at once. Sagres cut them off and gestured for Hermione. "Miss Granger, you may speak." "Professor, we weren't breaking rules this time," Hermione rushed out when she had the chance. "We were sent here as detention duty. Professor McGonagall assigned us." So the price of one rule breaking was another rule-tended task, Sagres thought, and bit back a sigh. Hermione pressed on, relieved to be heard. "We were assigned to look for an injured unicorn with Hagrid, and we ran into the thing that killed it. It attacked, and Hagrid told us to run, but Harry couldn't move for some reason. You can take your time, Miss Granger." Sagres softened slightly and cast a cheering charm over her. She visibly steadied and continued, glancing at Nightingale. "Then this woman appeared. She saved us." Sagres watched her, weighing every word. He then directed his attention to Hagrid. "Hagrid." "Professor, Hermione's right," Hagrid said, agitated. "That thing's been attacking unicorns and drinking their blood. I found one dead last Wednesday. This is the second." That brought Sagres a step closer to the truth, but he kept pressing for details. "Hagrid, you know this forest. What do you think it is?" "I don't know, Professor. I don't think it's a person. More like some kind of animal." Hagrid rubbed his beard. "Maybe a vampire?" It wore a cloak. We couldn't see well. Sagres nodded but said nothing, then looked toward the centaur nearby. Do you have anything to add? Ah, Mars is very bright tonight, the centaur said out of the blue. Sagres glanced at him. The centaurs had a reputation for being mystical and remote. This was typical, always reading the heavens rather than speaking plainly. He stepped closer to the unicorn's torn throat and knelt to examine the wound. The silencing charm was lifted, but the young wizards had nothing more to add. I don't think it's a vampire, Nightingale said suddenly. Holy light expulsion couldn't harm it, so it's not a dark creature. I think I understand, the centaur murmured. Alas, it's always the innocent who suffer first, he sighed. It was like this 300 years ago, and it's like this again today, 300 years later. Sagres disliked the centaur's cryptic manner. It would be one thing to keep secrets, he thought, but the centaur's dramatics, showing up and hinting at knowledge, felt like bait. Lion, he said, naming the centaur, you know what that thing is, don't you? Hagrid, upon hearing the name, stepped forward. Tell us, Lion. The centaur looked up at the stars. I cannot tell you, Hagrid. The stars have spoken. It is a secret of the forest. We are bound by our oath. We do not defy the will of heaven, nor reveal the omens shown to us. You're watching distant stars while a unicorn lies dead at your feet, Harry snapped, incredulous. How can you prefer omens to the creature in front of you? Sagres raised a hand to still the argument. Centaurs are skilled in astrology and the lore of herbs. They can read the heavens and interpret signs, but they prefer to observe rather than interfere. He cut off Hagrid, who was about to protest further, and addressed the group evenly. I know everyone wants answers, but you cannot expect others to risk themselves to help if they are bound by codes and omens. The centaur glanced at Sagres with what looked like gratitude. Sagres ignored it and continued the investigation, feeling the weight of the mystery settle over the clearing like the shadow of the forest itself. Actually, it isn't hard to figure out the truth if you know what unicorn blood is used for. Sagres dipped a finger into the silvery white blood, watching the viscous drop cling to his fingertip. His dark eyes never left it. But the textbooks never say what the blood's for, Hermione protested, frowning. In potions, we only use tail hair and horn. This would be to protect them. Unicorn blood can heal the deepest wounds and prolong life, even for those on the brink of death, Nightingale cut in, his tone flat and cold. But the moment your lips touch it, a curse will run through your line like a poisonous vine. First pain, then rot, then spirits gnawing at your organs, madness eating your mind, until your soul is full of holes. Very few people know that, Sagres agreed, and fewer still would dare. Who would do such a thing? Harry asked, bewildered. If that's what happens, better to die than live. Exactly. Hey? The centaur Leon nodded. Sagres stood and fixed Harry with a strange, fleeting smile. Harry, he asked quietly, you said the moment that person came near, the scar on your forehead hurt. Yes, Professor. It's hurt before sometimes, but never like that. Then isn't the answer plain? Sagres said. The smile vanished. Who has been waiting, biding time for years, desperate to come back? Who is clinging to life, preparing a return? Harry felt as if something had grabbed his chest. Sagres' words rang in his head. Hagrid's rough voice, remembered suddenly as if from another room, rasped. They say he's dead? That's the delusion of cowards. Souls like that can only wander the edge of life and death. They never find peace. You mean Lord Voldemort? Harry breathed. A cold shiver ran through the group. The Dark Lord, could he be in the Forbidden Forest? Had they just passed close to him? The scar on Harry's forehead, left by Voldemort, it had suddenly burned. Was that why it hurt? Was that the truth the centaurs had been unwilling to speak for fear of his retribution? But everyone says he fears Dumbledore, Hermione protested. He wouldn't hide so close to the school. Perhaps he wants something from the school. Ron's voice, sharp, made Harry and Hermione look at him. Magic, Ron finished, and the three understood at once. Whoosh! An arrow stabbed through the treetops and hurtled toward them. Hurricane! Sagres intoned casually. Rish, a sudden gust, a ring of wind, whipped up around the small group and deflected the volley. The wind died as quickly as it had risen, and the forest fell noisily silent for a beat. Centaur after centaur stepped from the shadows, bows still in hand, eyes hard. Poachers, someone spat. They killed a unicorn. Lion, why are you with them? Why did you bring others into the forest? Hagrid, we had an agreement. No one else, remember? The centaur's accusations crashed around them. Harry, Ron, and Hermione bristled. Sagres wore a patient, almost amused expression as he surveyed the new arrivals. It wasn't us. Lord Voldemort did it, Harry snapped. Lord Volde, one of the centaurs began, but Bane, a big, bitter-looking stallion man, cut him off. We all swore an oath. Have you forgotten? I didn't tell them anything, Lion muttered. Lies! Bane shouted, drawing an arrow and taking aim at Ron. They're arrogant fools, Sagres said, voice smooth. They only believe what they can see. An arrow came flying at him, shot in provocation. Sagres' expression hardly changed. With a shrug and a flick of his hand, the shaft reversed mid-flight and sped back at Bane. Bane ducked, but the arrow nicked his cheek. At once, the other centaurs snapped their bows to attention, drawing a forest of pointed heads on the humans. Lon, perhaps you should tell them our purpose now, Nightingale said, wand already in hand. Lion stood back, silent, sinking into the cluster of his kin. Sagres muttered under his breath, robe flicking. I knew this commission would be trouble. No matter. I handle trouble. Hagrid, take the humans and leave, Bane barked. You are not welcome here. What's gotten into you? Hagrid answered loudly, planting himself between the centaurs and the students, massive and immovable. We're only here to look into the unicorn's death. Arrows streaked toward Hagrid. The three students reached for their wands, but Sagres pressed their wrists down. Stand still, he ordered. He did not draw a wand himself. He lifted a hand and pointed. The flying shaft smoldered and disintegrated into ash. For the first time, a hard edge creased his face. I think you may have misunderstood something. He scanned the assembled centaurs, the calm in his voice brittle as ice. When did centaurs decide they were masters of the Forbidden Forest? The trees answered him. Without wind, the leaves started to stir. Thick green vines burst from the undergrowth and writhed across the ground like snakes. They laced around hooves and legs in an instant, tightening, lifting. There were startled cries and the clatter of bodies. Sagres waved his hand once more. More than 20 centaurs hung inverted from the vines like caught fruit, bound and helpless, their boughs clattering to the earth as the forest fell quiet again. Professor Greengrass. Hagrid's eyes widened at the sight, and he lunged forward, trying to stop him. Don't hurt them. They're just... Hagrid, Sagres cut him off sharply. Do I need to remind you? That centaur just fired 3 arrows, each aimed at our throats. But, Professor, think before you speak, Hagrid. Sagres' face was unreadable. He sighed faintly. Oh, how did it come to this? Hagrid fell silent, muttering anxiously, defeated in his pleading. The others were far less concerned. This particular herd of centaurs had been hostile from the start. Except for Hagrid, everyone subtly hoped they would get what they deserved. If not for the fact that Sagres was thinking of his commission, things might have gone far worse. He didn't intend to kill them, but he wanted to teach them a lesson. Tree roots tore from the soil and shot up like barbed spears. Branches stretched down from the canopy, their leaves sharpened into blades. The wooden spikes and razor-leafed boughs moved as if alive, menace aimed at the centaurs' throats. The young wizards stared, mouths open. These were exceptionally advanced homorphous charms, spells none of them had ever seen. Malfoy, for once, looked stunned. Only now did he understand why his father had warned him never to provoke that madman at school. The trio watched intently as Sagres toyed with his everlasting flowerwood wand and spoke. I hear centaur tribes usually have 2 leaders, he said, approaching Bane. One male, in charge of hunting and war, and one female, in charge of astrology and magic. He bent to Bane's level, withdrew his wand, and asked with a mocking tilt to his voice, What? She didn't give you a divination before you left today? The vines wrapped tightly around the centaurs' mouths so they could not answer. Sagres stood back, watching calmly. I didn't want this, he said aloud. My purpose here is simply to complete a commission. My friend rescued your companion from poachers. I'm responsible for returning him to the Forbidden Forest and collecting the reward. He looked past Bane at Lion. That's not hard to understand, is it? After all, it cost a considerable sum to buy him at the underground auction. He explained the whole story, how the unicorn's body had come to be there, leaving nothing ambiguous. Now, willing to behave like civilized beings, he waved his hand, and the vines loosened. One centaur began. "Centaurs never." Sagres cut them off, sealing their mouths with a cold flick. His patience was threadbare. At least dementors could be reasoned with through fear, but these centaurs behaved as if nothing would ever touch them. An arrow suddenly sprang from the earth and slammed into a centaur's shoulder blade. The creature twitched, pain making his limbs jolt. Nightingale stepped forward and rushed to cover the young wizard's eyes. "Never what?" Sagres asked flatly. "Never gentle and humble?" A second arrow shot out, burying itself in the opposite shoulder. "Never admit mistakes?" The next bolt passed clean through and landed squarely before Lion. "Never show gratitude?" A third arrow pierced Lion's right foreleg, wrought from dark magic eating at it. "Or never fulfill promises." The final shot shattered the already damaged limb. Hagrid could stand it no longer and took a step forward to beg Sagres to stop. Nightingale used the moment to intercede as well, and Sagres paused, briefly. He was determined, though. If he failed to secure this payment, he would not receive the Time Turner or the Divermus Mysterious from Snowy Owl. He was not willing to forfeit either item, and if pushing these centaurs toward a lesson was what it took, so be it. The ground trembled, a deep, thunderous clamor coming from farther into the forest. "A centaur, charge!" Nightingale warned, turning. A wild ringing of hooves crashed toward them. Sagres had already raised his wand. A slab of stone rose instantaneously from the earth, forming an impenetrable wall that split the charging herd in two. The centaur at the head rode tall. To everyone's surprise, he spoke with genuine contrition. "Please forgive my reckless kin," he said. "I apologize for their actions. I have brought the agreed payment." Sagres raised an eyebrow. The centaur astrologer had indeed been skilled. He had divined the course of events with uncanny accuracy. Then again, Kestrel had once told him that when a fate was about to shift dramatically, divination tended to be clearer. Perhaps the tribe's own disarray had made such prophecies easier. "I can accept your apology," Sagres said smoothly. "However, in addition to the materials we've agreed upon, you will provide a complimentary astrological reading for Snowy Owl." The polite tone took the young wizards by surprise. One moment there had been arrows and wounds. The next, calm diplomacy. Only a Slytherin, with Sagres' particular refinement, could switch from menace to manners so readily. Of course, the centaur leader nodded. "Before I came, a snowy owl found her and provided an astrological prophecy." "Even better," Sagres said, evidently pleased. He opened a pocket in his robes, and the gathered materials, twigs, parchments, and strange tokens, floated toward it, pulled into an undetectable extension charm. On the walk back to the castle, Nightingale bade them farewell and apparated away, leaving a strong, graceful impression on the young wizards. Hermione hesitated, then asked, "Professor, is Valus a vila?" Harry and Ron exchanged puzzled looks. They didn't know what a vila was. Sagres looked mildly surprised that Hermione did. "I shouldn't tell you everything," he admitted, "but Valus and I are friends, so I'll say this. Valus does have vila blood, but she is not a pure-blood vila." Hermione frowned. "How can that be? Only pure-blood vila are supposed to have that attraction. If she's half-blood, she shouldn't affect people like that." Sagres smiled and explained, "That's because she also carries snow elf blood. The two lines combined produce some unusual effects." He offered them a caution as they walked. "Don't be too frightened. You can learn occlumency after your 6th year. It will help protect your mind from external influences." The trio peppered him with questions the rest of the way, and he answered them patiently. Malfoy, unusually quiet, said nothing. The night's events had shaken him. First the cloaked specter, then the centaur's aggression. Malfoy felt the familiar certainties his pure-blood pride rested upon slipping away. In the Forbidden Forest, pedigree carried no weight. Sagres' display of magic made him realize that power, influence, and alliances mattered as much as, if not more than, bloodlines. "Oh, Hagrid," Sagres called as they neared the castle. "Don't go into the Forbidden Forest alone from now on." "All right, Professor Greengrass," Hagrid said quickly. "And if you absolutely must go," Sagres added more sternly, "you will be accompanied by a professor. I'll speak to Dumbledore about this." "Thank you, Professor. I'll be careful," Hagrid replied gratefully. 39. Final exam time passed quickly, and exam week arrived. turning Sagres' corridors into a bustle of nervous faces and rustling parchment. Drafting the final exam questions wasn't something he enjoyed, but this time he had taken more care than usual to make sure the papers covered the whole year. For Sagres, that wasn't difficult. His classes always brimmed with spells and techniques, but the real challenge was testing flexible application, the one thing the younger students consistently lacked. The weather had warmed, and the students grew increasingly irritable. The mood soured further when the professors handed out the special anti-cheating quills. Since Harry's return from the Forbidden Forest, he'd been suffering from nightmares. He knew more than anyone and felt powerless, watching time slip away as Voldemort slowly regained strength. Night after night, he imagined Snape finding a way past the protections around the Philosopher's Stone, stealing it, and delivering it to Voldemort waiting in the forest. If Voldemort returned, the first place he would come to would be Hogwarts. Harry's anxiety deepened by the day, yet the rest of Gryffindor stopped giving him the silent treatment, most simply chalked his behavior up to exam nerves. Hermione and Ron tried to reassure him constantly. Hogwarts was the safest place in the world. Voldemort would not dare attack openly, and Snape could never get past the trapdoor guarded by Fluffy. Still, the waiting was tense. At last, the week of finals began. Sagres only had to oversee the 6th and 7th year charms exams, and he kept the tests straightforward. "Listen up," he told the class. "The charms exam is simple. The practical is to catch one test paper. The theory is to complete the test paper you catch." "Professor, I don't understand," a student protested. "You will," Sagres said, and threw the papers into the air. The parchments flashed and folded themselves into birds, paper cranes, and insects that dashed and darted through the room. Catch one paper within 2 hours and you pass the practical. Any spell is allowed, even ones I haven't taught you. "What if we don't catch one, Professor?" another asked. "Then it's 0. Sagres sank into a chair. "Both theory and practical will be 0. He tapped his wand and a clock appeared on the blackboard. "You have 1 hour and 58 minutes. Chaos erupted. The paper creatures were quick and mocking, swooping around heads and taunting anyone who tried to grab them with bare hands. Wizards and witches drew their wands, and the room filled with streaks of spell light. Petrificus Taulis, Stupefy, Tarantallegra, a scattering of binding and freezing spells, leglocker curses. Every favorite jinx was cast without much thought. Spells collided and tangled, and at first, the sheer number of papers meant several students accidentally snatched one. Seeing that, others went even more frantic, firing spells into the thickest flurries of papers. A few unlucky students were struck by stray magic, and the moment Sagres' clock registered it, the class discovered an odd penalty. Every time someone was hit by another's magic, 1 minute vanished from the countdown. The penalty had a sobering effect. The room calmed as students began to aim carefully. Sagres intervened several times, rousing a boy struck by a stupefy, unbinding a girl mid-Tarantallegra, reversing a double Petrificus Totalis, and soothing a pupil covered in painful boils from a misfired fiery passion. As the number of papers dwindled, catching one became harder. The better students started coordinating. Some herded the papers into corners, others cast restraining charms to slow them, and a few specialized in wide-area spells to knock targets down. After 2 failed attempts, their teamwork improved, and finally a coordinated multi-shot from 8 students swept over nearly half the chamber and netted several papers. Sagres allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The undergraduates had learned something useful in practicals after all. There were, of course, fools who used incendio and simply burned their test papers, guaranteeing 0s. Sagres had said there were no banned spells, but he'd never expected anyone to try catching parchment with fire. Hours passed. When the exam time ended, the summoned papers obediently fluttered back into Sagres' hand. He collected them, stood, and left the classroom. The next morning, a pure white owl descended from the owlery, carrying a small cylinder in its talons. The letter it bore read, "To the esteemed Mr. Raven, your efficiency and discretion put even the most seasoned smugglers of Nocturne Alley to shame. Enclosed is the agreed remuneration for our contract, and with this letter, I acknowledge your impeccable adherence to our agreement. De Vermis Mysterious is enclosed. I hope it will help you unravel the mysteries in your heart and find the answers you seek. This collaboration has again confirmed the praise you receive in our circles. If there still were a hunting medal, it would surely belong to you. As always, my private collection room will maintain the highest standard of access for you. Should you require it in future, my encrypted flu password is Eternal Night Rainbow Light. P.S. I will hold the time turner for you until the Bronze Feather Gathering at the end of July. I sincerely hope you achieve your desires. Your dear partner, Snowy Owl, from the Eye of the Storm, Norwegian Sea Sagres, drew the manuscript from the package. A faint, cold rustle seemed to come off the parchment. The light in the room dimmed, and the air took on the scent of decay and shadow. The letters on the page appeared to writhe in the dimness, and a vague, troubling memory tugged at him. He frowned, tapped his wand, and sealed the manuscript with a brief flash of light so its influence could not leak out. He had long awaited this document, but this was no time for deep study. First, he would grade the exam papers. Then, during the holidays, he could take his time with his own affairs. Chapter 40. Hagrid's Stable Performance. When he came back from the Forbidden Forest, he found a moment to explain what had happened there to Dumbledore. The headmaster took it seriously and ordered Hagrid not to enter the forest for the time being. That left a practical problem for Hogwarts. The school had long cooperated with Ollivander's wand shop. Hogwarts supplied materials, and Ollivander offered discounts to newly enrolled students. This year, for various reasons, Hagrid had not yet gathered enough unicorn tail hair. So the job of going into the forest with Hagrid to collect materials fell to Sagres. He was reluctant, but he couldn't refuse. The more capable you were, the more work came to you. He kept telling himself that, almost managing to believe it. While collecting with Hagrid, he also kept an eye out for any sign of Lord Voldemort, but the forest was vast and there were no traces. Voldemort had likely been hurt by Vilas last time and would have hidden deeper. Final exams were over, but the students still had to stay at Hogwarts for another week while they waited for their results. It was a nerve-wracking time for some, especially Harry and Ron. Their marks had always been mediocre. Even though Hermione had forced them to cram before the exams, there had simply been too much to memorize. By the end, they'd almost given up. "Ah, this is brilliant. No more textbooks dragging me down," Ron said, flopped on the grass with marigold pollen tipping his nose. "This weather's perfect for sleeping." The three of them lay in the dappled shade, sunlight skittering across the ground and making them feel soporific. Harry suddenly sat bolt upright. Fragments of thoughts were colliding in his mind. "Hagrid!" He spun, the hem of his robe sweeping across the others. "We have to go see him now!" Hermione scrambled up on her knees. "Are you insane? Harry, we just had lunch. Didn't you notice?" Harry's breath came fast, almost panicked. "Hagrid wanted a dragon and he got one, but why would that stranger be carrying a dragon egg?" He ran on. "How many people would dare carry a dragon egg in their pocket? That's a statute of secrecy violation. And..." He stopped, swallowing. "And it's not hard to get information out of Hagrid. We know that better than anyone." Ron's grin froze. He looked at the goose flesh on Harry's neck and realized this wasn't a whim. They raced to Hagrid's cabin and arrived just after Sagres had returned with Hagrid. "Hello there," Hagrid called. "How did exams go?" "Well, could have gone worse." Ron started, but then saw Sagres and immediately straightened. "Good afternoon, Professor Greengrass." "Hello, Mr. Weasley." The other two students greeted Sagres quickly as well. "Hagrid, we need to talk." Harry glanced at Sagres. "Please, don't mind me," Sagres said, holding a teacup and watching Hagrid comb unicorn tail hair. "Do you remember the night you won Norbert, Hagrid? Do you remember who the dragon's previous owner was?" Hagrid, still handling the hair, didn't look up. "I didn't even see his face. The fellow wouldn't take his cloak off for anything." At that, the three of them stiffened and stared at Hagrid like they'd been struck. "Don't look at me like that. It was ordinary enough," Hagrid said, scratching his tangled hair. "There's always odd folk at the Hog's Head. I haven't the foggiest what he looks like." "We were playing Exploding Snap," Hagrid continued. "He was lucky at first and I had a fair bit to drink, but I won the last round and Norbert was mine. At the time he was a bit put out. He didn't think I could handle a dragon. I told him I didn't care about werewolves or giants, and even Cerberus would be tame for me. Was he particularly interested in Fluffy? Harry's voice was barely steady. His Adam's apple bobbed. Yes, Hagrid said matter-of-factly. Cerberus. Not many've seen one, and even fewer have raised one. He was curious, of course. And did you tell him anything else? Harry pressed. Hey, I only told him not to worry, that I'm good with magical creatures. Like with Fluffy. Play some music, and that little fellow calms down, softer than a kitten. Sagres felt his heart sink, and the three students looked horrified. Hagrid blinked, puzzled. Shouldn't have told you that then, he mumbled, but it was too late. The three students turned and ran. Goodbye, Professor. Goodbye, Hagrid, they shouted over their shoulders. Don't run, stop, Hagrid cried, slamming his great palm against the door and sending dust motes scattering from the frame. Music? What music? I didn't say anything. Sagres stood there, unsure what to say. What's wrong, Professor? Ah, nothing. Hagrid's expression was a mix of hurt and bewilderment. It wasn't that Sagres doubted Hagrid's honesty. He'd already asked Dumbledore about it not long before, and the headmaster had assured him that the Philosopher's Stone was safe. With Dumbledore stationed at Hogwarts and Quirrell evidently ineffectual, spending all his time hoping someone would notice his strangeness and rescue him from Lord Voldemort's influence, Voldemort himself dared not boldly enter the castle. The stone was safe for now. Still, Sagres had planned to use any spare time to search the Forbidden Forest thoroughly. Perhaps he'd be lucky and find traces of the Dark Lord. That afternoon, however, Dumbledore called Sagres to his office and told him he needed to go to the Ministry of Magic, instructing him to suspend his forest search temporarily. Sagres had no objections. Back in his own rooms, with nothing else pressing, he took up the De Vermis Mysterious manuscript to study. The De Vermis Mysterious had originated in the 12th century underground of a Venetian monastery whose name history had erased. Its author, Edmund the Blind Monk, had been a notorious inquisitor in the Muggle world. During one of his witch-burning campaigns, he'd found a piece of human skin covered in writing. Edmund then spent 39 years in the monastery's subterranean lab before finally completing the manuscript. Sagres had seen a fragmentary rubbing of it during his travels and had read only the first half back then. The text carried an ugly mental taint, but it was not only worthless dark arts. From it, he had invented his flesh-stripping charm, whose effect went far beyond causing pain. He had even gleaned hints of flesh magic and soul magic from those pages. If he could fully comprehend the manuscript, he might be able, in short order, to create an entirely new form of soul magic.